Comic Geek Speak presents The Crisis Tapes, Episode 13, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Issue 2, Part 2. Welcome to the show. I am Adam Murdo.
I am Peter Rios.
Welcome back once again to the Monitor Satellite as we continue our discussion of the Crisis on Infinite Earths maxi series itself. What's past is prologue, and now we've moved on into the meat of the story, and we are having a great time doing it.
So I should let listeners know right up front, connections are spotty today. There's sunspot activity and red skies, and if for some reason I'm a little choppy, Adam will jump in and tell me to repeat myself, but hopefully it won't be too bad.
Yeah, it's because his parallel Earth is slowly ceasing to exist, you see. So,
ain't that the truth?
Yeah. There'll be some garbled subspace transmissions in here. It's all a part of our growing pains here, folks. The CGS studio is in a bit of a shambles at the moment as we continue our evolution from strictly audio to audio and video podcast. And there will be no video dimension to this episode or future episodes of Crisis Tapes, just so you're knowing. But it's still, the renovations have taken their toll on our basic recording setup, and so please pardon our dust. All right, and then that was the sound of
We're going through a little crisis ourselves.
Crisis on Infinite Microphones.
So why don't we start off with some current crisis news?
Sounds good to me, Peter, because as we were just saying before we turned the microphones on, there's kind of no way we can avoid talking about this because it's a huge deal here in this 30th Crisis anniversary year. A couple of the things that were released just this past week, and we're not out to spoil anything for anyone, but it's something that we, as comics quote-unquote journalists and Crisis fans, really can't resist or avoid talking about. So, Peter, why don't you start us off?
Well, I have a list. I have a list of three things. Two of them are comic book related. Obviously, the release of Multiversity issue 2 and also Justice League number 40, both of which mention and reflect not only on the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, but on events and multiverse-shattering events within the DC universe itself. And it's hard to ignore the language of what they're talking about. It's hard to ignore the imagery that's being presented, especially in Justice League, right down to the cover, which could very well just be an homage to Crisis on Infinite Earths number 6, with the face of the Anti-Monitor. Although Justice League number 40 is the face of the Anti-Monitor mixed, across from the split face of Darkseid. Right. But it really does look like issue 6 of Crisis.
Yeah, and the hemispheric face thing, half of Anti-Monitor and half of Darkseid, kind of brings to mind the cover to issue 5 too. So all the faces and also the Earth 1, Earth 2 doppelgangers bisected. Yeah.
So, again, I don't know how deep we want to go, but I mean, my favorite nod out of both of those is the double-page spread in Justice League issue 40 by Phil Jimenez, which is a direct homage to Crisis number 10, as the Anti-Monitor and Spectre battle at the beginning of time with all the heroes around, and it is a direct, from Phil Jimenez himself on Twitter, it is a direct homage to issue 10, and it's beautiful. And again, I don't know how deep you want to get into the story of it, but it's there, plain to see.
Yes. Now, the whole thing, it's meant to be a prologue to an upcoming story called The Darkseid War. And it really doesn't involve the Justice League very much at all. Instead, it's a reflection on crises past, told largely from the point of view of Metron. But the Anti-Monitor is also present. Now, this is the New 52 version of the Anti-Monitor. I don't want to get into too much detail, but suffice to say, Jeff Johns has taken it into his head to elaborate a bit on the Anti-Monitor's background. We're going to learn hitherto unknown things about the Anti-Monitor, some of which I think are going to contradict hitherto known things about the Anti-Monitor. So,
visually, I'm just sort of glad he's back in the original look again.
As opposed to the blue and orange, like armor by Mattel.
It's almost tubular, right? The second armor that he wears,
totally.
even up to Sinestro Corps War. It's never been my favorite look. And then, like you said, the new knowledge that we readers get, it's sort of interesting and left fieldish, but also I don't know. It's kind of interesting. And where it connects to and all that. So, somewhere down the road we can talk about it.
Yeah. For now, It's kind of interesting. I just hope it doesn't go from there to being kind of infuriating.
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway, and this isn't spoiling anything, I think the biggest takeaway is the idea, and I don't think it's necessarily totally new, but the idea that all of these multiverse-shattering events are coming at a faster pace. And I almost get the idea that Johns is saying, let's stop with these things.
Which is what a lot of fans have been saying all along. So
yeah,
it's kind of good that this notion has it's gained so much currency that now it's achieved metatextual validity. Now even the characters within the fabric of the DC universe, like Metron, are becoming aware of the fact that there's too damn many reboots happening.
Yeah. And I don't even know if that's really what the Darkseid War will be about, but it's an interesting notion nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm sure we will both be paying attention as the months roll along here.
What about multiversity? Anything you want to say about that?
It's I don't know. It's Morrison, which means it's dense and it's idiocentric, and it's a little difficult to explain or even hint at without spoiling certain things. But Morrison seems to have created another kind of big bad. It's not the Anti-Monitor, but it's like a personification of the urge to negate and revamp continuity, and we're a whole bunch of multiversal heroes witness this guy. They don't actually get a chance to fight him. It's implied that a fight will at some point occur, but it's kind of left with a bit of a cliffhanger. We're told that this guy has already built an empire on the ashes of he and his flunkies, the Gentry, their most recent victim, whom he calls Multiverse 2.
Multiverse 2!
That's right. Multiverse -digit 2. So
not just Earth 1 and Earth 2, but Multiverse 2. My head just about exploded when I saw that. That is awesome.
Yeah, it's like I think Morrison's planning to introduce some new vocabulary to the DC fan lexicon. So now we've had universe and multiverse. So what next? Like polyverse for a cluster of. He's already mentioned the term local multiverse, which is I guess the 52 Earths that have been discussed in DC Comics of late. So maybe there could be more to it than that. There could be infinite Earths in this new multiverse, or perhaps there's the local multiverse, and then there's the extended multiverse, or all of which are part and parcel of an all-encompassing omniverse, which is a word that Mark Gruenwald liked to use for all fictional worlds, Marvels, DCs, independent publishers, novel publishers, movie realities, it's milieu, etc. The possibilities are staggering. But I think we can assume that, I'm assuming anyway, that Multiverse 2 means the multiverse that came into being at the end of, after Infinite Crisis, that was slowly hinted at during the 52 maxi series, and that existed briefly until Flashpoint came along and created the reality that we've got now. So
because pre-Crisis, the multiverse is different. Right?
So
the Earth 2s are different.
Absolutely.
So it's not that extreme of an idea when you just sort of sit down and go, the multiverse prior to 1986 is not the same multiverse that came out of 52 and is not the same multiverse that came out of Flashpoint. So
we're on Multiverse 3 by now, I guess.
And there was also some fun fan speculation that maybe he meant Multiverse 2 is the destruction of the Marvel Universe going on right now.
Huh.
Just sort of like a hyper metatextual kind of reading of it.
Well, which would be nice, but it may be somewhat invalidated depending on, how long ago Morrison would have written the script for this issue. If any news would have surfaced yet about Marvel's plans to do Secret Wars at that time.
Right. Well, the third Crisis Watch current Crisis tidbit has to do with the Flash TV series. And if you've been watching it, you know that there's... Have you been watching it, Adam?
Actually, I started missing episodes. The problem is we've been recording CGS on Tuesday nights a lot recently. And so I've... I kind of fell off the wagon midway through. When it went on mid-season hiatus is as far as I've caught up to. And I went back to CW.com to try and watch Going Rogue and episodes forward from that, and found that they only have like the last 5 episodes posted on that website. So I'm kind of screwed at this point. Just have
you know about
pray
the
for summer
secret
reruns.
You know about the Secret Room?
I do know about that, yes.
And the newspaper?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Red skies and all of that.
Right, and it says something about Flash lost in the crisis or something.
Oh, I sure saw that. Yes, I did.
Yeah. Well, there's been some new information about that maybe seems to suggest that it's not as big as we would want it to be, but that doesn't mean they can't change their minds later. So in the most recent episode, as we're recording this, it's April 30th, kind of speculated. The newspaper article, they actually give a little bit of information of what that event more or less is, and it didn't sound so big, but that doesn't mean it can't change in the future. But it's still being touched on, which is interesting to me as a Crisis person. I still want to know.
Yeah, you and me both. At this point, there's a lot I want to know about the Flash TV series, but I just got to wait for summer reruns or DVD release, I guess.
So that's it. That's what I have for Crisis Watch. Dun, dun, dun.
See? Who says a podcast devoted exclusively to a 30-year-old 12-issue series can't have some current news?
Shall we jump back into issue 2?
Oh, yes, let's. Head first. All right, so we left off just exactly midway through the issue, what I like to call staple point, where you can see the 2 little staples that hold the issue together. That's when you know you've read exactly half of the pages. So that was page 14 that we talked about at the end of our last episode, episode 12. And now we go right into the Monitor's emissaries, the Great 15, going about to the crucial points in DC timeline history where the Monitor has set up his Sentinel towers, the giant techno tuning forks, as have they been affectionately nicknamed by fans over the years. We only get to see 2 of them in the second half of this issue, issue 2. And the first of them takes us to one of DC's most famous alternate futures. In fact, the establishing caption is it's a little larger than the average such caption. It's very, very bold red with yellow lettering. It's about a half an inch high, and it tells us that we're looking at the Great Disaster. So this is, of course, the world of Jack Kirby's creation, Commandy, the last boy on Earth. The wrecked Statue of Liberty, visible clearly in the background behind the tuning fork tower, and also seen in the image on the front cover, as we mentioned in our last episode, tells you that this is indeed that world. This is the Great Disaster, the future world that's coming, as Kirby liked to call it, in which the series Commandy, the last boy on Earth, was set, which was originally supposed to be a Planet of the Apes series, actually, but then Marvel managed to steal the license for that out from under DC, and so they retaliated by having Jack Kirby, who had recently returned to the DC fold, come up with something that was a lot like Planet of the Apes, but not quite.
Apparently using concepts that he created as far back as 1956.
Oh, wow.
I don't have much more information than that, but in the little research that I was able to dig up, I got that same thing about Planet of the Apes, and then there was some kind of strip that he did that played around with some of the probably very raw, in a very raw form.
Yeah, they would have had to be pretty raw to be adapted to something as specific as this post-apocalyptic world inhabited by walking, talking animals, and only a handful of human beings. All right, so we've got this huge splash page here on page 15, which gives us our first look at one of these giant vibro towers that the Monitor has built at what he calls key points in history, where points which are nexus points for heroic activity, and which he feels are going to be likely targets for his great adversary. Caption says, "It is sometime in some future, in a timeline that, at times, stands between modern Earth and a 30th century which knows nothing of its existence." So there's Marv Wolfman kind of heaving a writerly sigh and pointing up one of the major inconsistencies in DC Comics history that this series is hoping to remedy. As this alternate future of Commandy is it's well loved and well known, but it's hard to reconcile it with the present and the DC universe of the present and the 30th century reality of the Legion of Superheroes. And so he tells us that it exists at times, which hints at the inconsistency of the lack of definite grounding for certain of DC's alternate timelines and alternate futures. It's hard to put them all together into a single, uniform, continuous timeline. And so Crisis is coming in to help wipe some of these incongruities out in a very definite and dramatic fashion.
I know with that Legion of Superheroes concept, there were times when they would often infer that history post 1985, 1986 was always cloudy. Mm-hmm. Their records were incomplete, whether that was because of wars or time or whatever. I mean, that was something that they would start to introduce post-crisis. I don't know if that – I don't remember if that's something that they would do pre-crisis as well. So that was you're right. It's as Wolfman says, it's all over the place, and some of it could be written – some of it could be justified by that, but I liked that wording. I liked that wording of, I mean, not only with when did Hex, the series, begin?
Not until after Crisis. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll look that up as we're talking here, but I want to say 1987 is when that got off the ground. Because remember, it was still going on as of 1984 because one of the Monitor appearances happened in an issue of Jonah Hex, still set in the 19th century.
And I know don't they mention Hex in issue 12, or am I thinking of the history of the DC Universe?
I think you may be thinking of the history of the DCU, because I'm sure Future Hex is mentioned there. Oh, wait a minute. All right. September of 1985.
Oh.
So there you go. It's that gets started before Crisis is even over.
So maybe that is mentioned in 12.
Yeah, I guess it's possible.
Yeah. Because that would certainly be another inconsistency time-wise, because that took place, after? Didn't they specifically mention World War III or IV or something like that in that one?
I can't say. I've never read an issue of Hex.
Okay. It's actually not too bad in a couple places. There's some great issues of Batman of the Future, and the Legion pops up, and then Keith Giffen gets his hands on it for a couple of issues. It's an interesting run.
Yeah. Lasting only 18 issues, according to this.
Yep.
Final issue cover dated February of 1987.
Well, a couple of my notes here, all just based on that first narrative box. The Great Disaster has been around since 1972. So, a little more than 10 years, 13 years or so. And up to this point, a lot of Kirby's concepts didn't get much play within the DC universe, the proper DC universe. I don't mean that offensively. I just mean DCU proper. Outside of his Commandy title, he showed up in Brave and the Bold. There was Karate Kid. And his last appearance prior to this, I believe, was in DC Comics Presents number 64 from 1983 with Superman. And, so now I think it's interesting. We're starting to see a lot of the Jack Kirby concepts coming into the DC universe even more than they had been. It's a very interesting time, that early 80s, where the New Gods and Commandy kind of get some play, and they certainly get play here in the Crisis, and then they really get a lot of play post-Crisis.
Oh, they sure do. Yep, unity and integration seems to be the major theme here. Just reminding everyone that DC's got such a great and stunning diversity of concepts and settings to play with, and that they're all part of the same sandbox, and that's one major thing that Crisis was intended to establish. And you can kind of see the same thing going on right now with Convergence, I would say. It's kind of the same idea, just all these different realities that DC's published, all these different versions of different characters, and they're all just being tossed together into the blender for one big, silly story to kill some time while DC moves its head office. So, Crisis and Convergence have that much in common anyway.
Do you want to talk about Commandy being the last boy of Earth, and then sort of a connection to what opened this issue with Anthro, the first boy?
Oh, yes, that's true. We did mention that last time out. Yeah, this is an idea that Grant Morrison had, and that Len Wein, as it turns out, had many years before he did, which was when this was still being conceived as the history of the DC Universe, as opposed to Crisis on Infinite Earths. They were going to try and begin it with Anthro, the first boy on Earth, or the first human boy, anyway, and ending it with Commandy, the last. And so in either Morrison's final Crisis plans or Wein and Wolfman's Crisis on Infinite Earths plans, that structure didn't quite pan out in either case, but we do at least get a little of each in this issue. We begin the issue with Anthro, and we do halfway through get a little bit of Commandy, the last boy on Earth. So we get a little glimpse of him in his natural habitat. We don't get to see any of the intelligent, erect animals with whom he usually interacts, but they're mentioned. And eventually, so we're reintroduced to the world of the Great Disaster, the future world that's coming. And before this 12-issue series is over, we'll be told that this timeline is no longer valid. So it's kind of a quick last boy on Earth story here. Commandy's involvement here. Because eventually we're told that he and another alternate future DC Comics character, Tommy Tomorrow, are one and the same. That is a tangent for a future episode.
Yeah. Gotta love the Perez tech of the tower.
Busy.
Right? And sort of reminiscent of the Monitor satellite to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely in the color scheme.
Nope, yep. Lots of exposed circuitry and vents and tubing and all of that.
Does make you wonder how Commandy got that vine all the way up there, but I'll let that go.
He's got skills.
It's a great introduction, though. It's a great splash page. It sort of speaks to the... kind of makes you wonder how did they hold Kirby's creations at this point? You know, what did Wolfman think of all the New God stuff? I mean, you know, certainly Kirby's New Gods work warranted a graphic novel. It warranted some reprintings, even in early '80s, on some Baxter Paper issue comics, you know. So I wonder if he felt, you know what, we got to bring some of these concepts in, because like you said, they want to figure out what the hell their DC timeline is. But just the scope of not only the tower and giving Commandy this kind of presence for the next couple of issues is kind of interesting.
Yep, and you can tell, well, by the time Darkseid finally shows up, you can tell that Wolfman felt obligated to make use of the Fourth World stuff in some way, shape, or form. I got the impression, and I may be way off base with this, of course, but I got the impression that Wolfman, he wanted to include it, but he didn't want to include it too deeply, didn't want to do too much with it because it might throw off the entire power dynamic of the story he was trying to tell. Maybe this Darkseid War thing that Johns is thinking of doing in Justice League right now is going to... the Darkseid's role is kind of behind the scenes. I mean, he clearly doesn't want Apocalypse and New Genesis to get involved in this whole big struggle because they're kind of defined as being off in a parallel dimension, and that's... Again, that's the difference between a parallel universe and an alternate dimension is hazy. But Darkseid pretty clearly wants he wants the Anti-Monitor to be stopped and is willing to offer a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit of subtle aid to the heroes and in some cases villains who are trying to bring the crisis to a conclusion, but he doesn't want to challenge the Anti-Monitor directly. And so in the Darkseid War, we'll get what would happen if Darkseid had decided to get involved a little more directly. But yeah, the Kirby concepts, it does seem that Wolfman felt they needed to be addressed in some way, but not so much so that they required him to rewrite his plot around them.
How about we go to the next page? Do you have anything else on page 15?
No, I don't think I do.
Okay. Want to lead us into 16?
Okay, so Commandy is doing his Adam West rope climb up the side of the Monitor Tower, and he's musing to himself that there's a lot of lost science that they, in the age of the Great Disaster, still don't know much about. He's thinking to himself in the last page that this tower definitely he's familiar with this stretch of territory near the Statue of Liberty, and he's never seen this tower before. He's wondering if the fact that it popped out of nowhere is something to do with whatever function its inventors in the age of human beings might have intended it for. And he thinks to himself about Dr. Canis and talking out loud. He's Dr. Canis is a dog man, an evolved dog scientist who is one of Commandy's few friends in this future world of his. And he drops reference to the fact that he and Dr. Canis had a falling out. They had some kind of fight. He's not sure if he's ever going to see Dr. Canis again, but this is, I'm sure, a reference to something that went down in one of his earlier appearances. I don't know if it was a part of the Kirby series, or it definitely wasn't a part of DC Comics Presents number 64, which I have read, and Dr. Canis was not a part of that story. Any idea, Peter?
Well, this is my first note for this page as we sort of footnote along panel by panel. Remember when we were talking about Anthro in the previous episode and how his mate, Embra, is now pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
And I questioned, is that something that is a lead? Is that something that's connecting back to a prior Anthro appearance, or is it just something that Marv Wolfman decided to push his story along to show that these characters have evolved from the last time you saw them? And I almost wondered if that's what's going on here as well, without having read. Although I own quite a number of Commandy issues, I haven't read them, and I wonder. I mean, as you said, it doesn't happen in DC Comics Presents. So the end of the Commandy series is even further than that. I can't imagine that's a story point going all the way back there. So I think the more interesting speculation is Wolfman once again showing that this Crisis story takes place later. Everybody's kind of, moved along a couple of months. And is this some kind of just interesting untold tale to give Commandy, a little bit more of a story beyond what we may know of him?
Yeah, it may serve to explain why he's by himself here, too. Maybe Wolfman contrived this, he invented this quarrel between Commandy and Dr. Canis just because he didn't want Commandy and Dr. Canis and maybe other members of his supporting cast, too, along here. He just wanted Commandy out roaming around by himself and discovering this, the Tuning Fork Tower. So maybe that's why.
Right. As I'm reading ahead, I saw one other possible example of that kind of flash forward storytelling. So when we get to that issue, it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on it. But we'll get to that later.
Okay, so while Commandy is wondering to himself about this tower and thinking about Dr. Canis and so on, a shadow demon pops up, and it comes directly out of the Monitor's tower. It severs the convenient vine that Commandy's been climbing up. Commandy plummets to his death, has enough time to say, "Uh-oh, lost my grip, I'm done for," as he falls, but then he's seized by an arm clad in a blue sleeve with a ridged cuff, and we get a close-up shot of a very friendly, welcoming-looking visage of the Earth 2 Superman. So Superman comes to the rescue of Commandy, and Commandy recognizes him and addresses him as Superman. And Earth 2 Superman's not sure how Commandy would know who he is, and then he realizes, of course, you must have met my Earth 1 counterpart. It's a small world, and getting smaller if we don't do something to help, says Earth 2 Superman. All of which is kind of funny because I dug into my back issue collection and got out DC Comics Presents number 64, which is when Commandy and Earth 1 Superman met. And Commandy never actually learns Superman's name in that story. He just calls Superman Mighty One the whole time.
Which is a holdover from the Commandy series, right? Because the myth of Superman or Super Spaceman or something like that. Space meaning, a space between the two words, super and man. But there is a 2-page spread of some kind of like cave drawing and a map, and the Superman suit existed into the Great Disaster, or at least an image of it. So the myth of Superman crosses into the Great Disaster. But I forgot that he didn't really learn his name in the DC Comics Presents issue.
All right, so Superman has arrived, and with him are Dawnstar and Solivar. So this is the team that's been dispatched to the Great Disaster. Again, we've got 15 of Monitor's agents, and 3 of them, 3 have been sent to each of the 5 critical points in time. So this is the Great Disaster team: Earth 2 Superman, Dawnstar, and Solivar. Dawnstar remarks that this is obviously the Monitor's machine. So, being a tracker, maybe she sees something that the rest of us don't, that makes it obviously the Monitor's handiwork. I don't think the Monitor's agents were really told what to expect in so many words. And then there's some interaction here between Solivar and Commandy. Solivar addresses Commandy as boy and asks him when the Shadow Demon showed up and if there were more than one. And Commandy doesn't quite hear the question. He just jumps straight to the fact that he's talking to a talking gorilla, something that he's unfortunately had a little too much experience with. He accuses Solivar of being one of, quote, Tsar Simeon's hired killers. Solivar assures him that he's not. He's here to help. He's not even a talking gorilla from this era. He's not from Commandy's time period. And Commandy just kind of gazes wide-eyed at him and makes an observation that you could expect a boy who's been raised among animals to have. He says, your eyes are different from the other animals, warmer, more trusting. Expect him having grown up under the conditions that he has and having learned, not only to distrust talking animals, but he's also, having encountered a few friendly ones, such as Dr. Canis, learned from them. I'd expect someone like Commandy to be a little more sensitive to nonverbal cues like that, to the looks in people's eyes and, in other beings' eyes and their facial expressions. And so pretty quickly, a rapport develops between Solivar and Commandy. It almost becomes kind of like a mentor relationship. Like Solivar takes kind of a paternal shine to the last boy on Earth in these few pages of interactions between them in this issue and next.
It's a dynamic that I didn't. You know how in the first issue we were trying to figure out why Wolfman picked the Great 15?
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't hit me with this sequence. It actually hit me with the next era that we go to. So then I backtracked and thought, okay, so why did Wolfman send these 3 particular characters to the Great Disaster? What you're talking about, the relationship that Commandy has with talking animals kind of seems like Solivar is the perfect fit to send back to this time or forward to this time or whenever. And to get that you could get that kind of characterization between the two of them, or even just, hey, Commandy, there's this larger multiverse that your little brain probably can't figure out, so we're going to send you at least 2 beings that could be moderately familiar. And who knows, a pretty girl with wings might not be all that repulsive to him. So I kind of sat there and went, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Of course you would send a Superman, and you would send a Simeon that, yeah, he might be a little repulsed by initially, but once he gets to know him, maybe it teaches him something, as you mentioned. Maybe it shows him that his world doesn't have to be as
dog eat dog, shall we say?
There's other, yeah. And then of course Dawnstar with the wings, which are also animalistic to some degree.
Sure.
I don't remember if the Commandy series had bird people or anything, but. So I thought the choices kind of make sense. What do you think of that?
Very well reasoned. I hadn't thought it through as far as the reasons for Superman and Dawnstar, but yeah, the Superman being one of maybe 2 present-day DC Universe characters with whom Commandy had ever interacted, and Dawnstar being, as you said, avian in nature. But yeah, as I was reading this issue, the Solivar thing clicked in my head, and I thought, well, maybe Wolfman just thought to himself, wouldn't it be cool to do a story introducing Commandy to a talking animal who would teach him that talking humanoid animals aren't all bad?
Right.
He just kind of thought that a Commandy and good King Solivar story would be a fun story to tell, and that might be a major reason why he chose Solivar as part of Monitor's Great 15 team in the first place.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you have this many characters, the thing you want to do is find the interconnectiveness of some of them that makes it fun to put them together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure.
Dawnstar calls, by the way, the third panel up top, no, the fourth panel where the Shadow Demon is breaking the vine. Obviously, if you have the issue in hand, it's kind of a direct reference to the cover, which is also a Shadow Beast coming out of the machine, the vine snapping, and more than 3 of those characters coming to Commandy's aid, but definitely Superman, Dawnstar, and Solivar are on the cover as well. So it's a nice little throwback to the cover there.
Yep, as seen from above rather than below.
Yeah, yeah. And Dawnstar calls it a Shadow Beast. And we still haven't, I don't think, did we get the term Shadow? Yeah, we did. I think Killer Frost named them Shadow Demon.
Yeah, but the vocabulary hasn't really been formalized yet at this point. It's just people just using whatever name comes to mind.
As, if we're done with 16, she goes to page 17, and she calls it the Shadow Thing. So,
saying that
soon enough. What's that?
Oh, go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, like you said, the Crisis vocabulary or lexicon or whatever it's called, slowly in these first early issues starting to be cemented, and eventually it'll be cemented for sure.
Right. Yeah, so as you said, Dawnstar says that the Shadow Thing is back, this time with friends, which is odd because the last time she saw the Shadow Thing, it was part of a mob.
Yeah, and she also says it doesn't seem as strong, yet in this appearance on this page 17, on the third panel there, it just touches Commandy, and he starts to burn. And those Shadow Demons in issue 1 were clearly touching the heroes, and they were not burning.
Well, which heroes were touched, though?
Geoforce was being pulled to the ground. The one was almost wrapped around him, pulling him down to the ground.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. Commandy's purely human, though. That's the thing. He has no kind of superpowers that he could use. He's no invulnerability. He's no shadow phasing powers. Geoforce might have some kind of vibratory thing happening, or maybe channel some kind of geothermal energy to counteract whatever the Shadow Demon's touch is supposed to do. But Commandy's just he doesn't even have any clothing up there to protect him, for crying out loud. So. Yeah, I get the feeling that if Commandy had been on board the Monitor satellite as part of that brawl and he'd been touched, he probably just would have been incinerated right away.
Possibly, yeah.
Although,
I mean, a lot of them die in issue 12 by the same touch.
Right. I always think of Clayface and Bug-Eyed Bandit. But again, that's a topic for another time.
Yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Of course. Yeah, and while we're on the subject of the Shadow Demons, whether they had friends with them last time they appeared or not, I gotta say, I'm looking at, as usual, at my my hardcover trade and my issue simultaneously, and the recoloring they did for the collection is not always an improvement on the original, because in the original issues, the Shadow Demons are inked in heavy black, which I think is a lot more striking. But then in the collection, the black is muted, and it's kind of a shade of gray. I don't think really makes them look more shadow-like. It certainly doesn't make them look any more menacing. It just makes them look like, I don't know, lint bunnies or something.
I think what they were trying to do was go for some kind of like transparency, as shadows are. You can, when you look at a shadow, it's not like it's not
just solid ink. You can usually at least make out what's underneath it.
Yeah, but I agree. I much prefer the flat black look to them.
All right. So, also talking of Shadow Demons, Dawnstar observes, I think she's the first character to notice this, unless I'm completely mistaken, their silhouette was the same as the Monitor's own. So here's you can see that they've all got capes and those epaulettes that the Monitor usually wears. And I know we touched on this in the last episode too. But, not much reason given so far as to why the Shadow Demons look like that, as eventually we learned that they were Quardians that were altered in unspeakable ways by the Anti-Monitor. So perhaps at this early stage in the story, they're intended to be some kind of red herring for us, the reader. We're supposed to think that the Monitor's intentions are not as benign as they seem.
Right.
And then eventually the Shadow Demons flee, and Dawnstar offers to give chase, but Solovar, ever wise Solovar, stands still and says, "No, girl, let them go. We were brought here to protect the machine, not to leave it alone for a second attack." So perhaps the Shadow Demons are just there to decoy the heroes away from the machine. Maybe that's why they were pulling their punches in their first attack, realizing they didn't have much chance of killing these characters, particularly not Earth 2 Superman. Anyway, so just cause a little bit of trouble and then run away and hope the heroes will follow them so that they can then double back and destroy the machine.
And then we get that final panel with such a great dialogue from Solovar. I love it. You want to read it?
"I agree. Yet somehow I feel the Shadow Demons are merely a prelude to some greater disaster." Yes, funny because it's very, very true, and also funny because of the play on great disaster.
Yeah,
and then,
I like that.
And then Commandy gives us the punchline, "Will someone tell me what's going on here?" It's about the third time someone has uttered words to that effect. Batman, in this issue, on page 8, Batman asks, "Dear God, what is happening?" And that's the cue to change scene. And Commandy does the same thing here, and sure enough, that's our transition to page 18. It's a sort of a one-page segue between what's going on in the era of the Great Disaster and what will be going on in ancient Atlantis. But for one page in between, we get Harbinger looking, or one of her anyway, looking down at the commotion down below at the Commandy time period Vibro Tower. She stands and watches and chuckles and thinks to herself, "Let them protect the machine. It will serve those fools no good. Their efforts will be rewarded with death." And then we cut back aboard the Monitor's satellite. We get some more wordy narrative captions reminding us for like the third time in this issue that, yes, Harbinger has been possessed by some dark force. Yes, she's been pressed into the service of the Monitor's adversary, his deadly foe. And yes, she is like a daughter to the Monitor. The Monitor raised her since childhood. And so when she ultimately betrays him, it will be that much more tragic. It will be that much deeper and more cutting and shocking a betrayal. So this is storytelling in the age of Claremont, reminding us of these things over and over and over again.
Yeah, this I don't have much on this page outside of the physical nature of the Monitor, the way he's leaned up against the back of his seat, always one to he's in a very weak state. I think it's a great storytelling thing on Perez's part.
That and in all of his pre-crisis cameos, he was usually seen in a high-backed chair over which you couldn't see very much of him, but a gloved hand here and there. I get what you're saying there, and I agree with it, that it's a great touch for Perez and that he's in a weakened state, and so he would be reclining and getting his ergonomic support and all of that. But it also follows from his earlier appearances.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then we have it always in this. I'm using the original issue, and certainly the printing process in this one, issue 2, is much better than it was in issue 1. But when they look on to Alexander Luthor Jr. and he's aged to about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old right now.
Certainly a lot older than the infant he was last time we saw him.
Right. the dialogue there says, she doesn't quite know how to answer when she's looking at the baby. She doesn't know what she's seeing. And I always, initially, I kind of looked at it and said, what is she seeing? Is it just because he's grown up in a matter of hours? And that's one of the reasons. But also, along his body is some kind of star field that is very, very muted in the original issue. But I think in the collections, it stands out a little bit more.
Only the tiniest bit, Peter, because I'm looking at both of them side by side here, and that's, it was another point I was going to make, that they didn't always do quite enough to improve on the original when they remastered all of this for the collection, because you can barely make out the little white spots on little Alex's left-hand side here either in the collection.
Yeah. But great shot of Harbinger's eyes, giving her those otherworldly, almost cat-like eyes.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't have much more for this page.
Yeah, you'd almost think that the Monitor rescued her from Thundera. Yep. But yeah, it's a good transitional page. It advances the Harbinger betrayal subplot a little bit and gives us a major twist in the arc of Alex Luthor, and all in the space of a page, and then slings us straight along into Atlantis of 45,000 years ago. So, and the away team here is, no-brainer. Arion, Lord of Atlantis, is sent home to protect the Shining Realm. And with him are a couple of Earth 2 natives, Obsidian of Infinity Inc. and Psycho Pirate. Arion's... go ahead, Peter.
You want to hear my explanation about why I think they chose these three characters?
Sure, go ahead.
Or do you? I mean, one of them, like you said, is obvious, Arion, because they're in Atlantis. Visually, look at the three of them. They all have capes, two of them cloaks. Even Arion has a collar. Visually they look the same, even right down to the Medusa mask and Obsidian's mask. You could make some comparisons there, unwarranted. It's not like I'm saying all of this is exactly the reason why, but to a larger degree, and this is where this sort of first hit me. They're also oddly connected in terms of emotion when you think of Obsidian and the Psycho Pirate. The Psycho Pirate having the Medusa mask, the Obsidian when he encapsulates people, when he brings people into his shadow self, he can even have them see their the worst parts of themselves almost. There's also something to be said about the dark, how all three of their powers have some kind of dark resonance to them. Obsidian's powers being literally the dark, but also the dark side of people. Psycho Pirate is an agent of chaos, an agent of evil, and even Arion to some degree, between his mother and father,
right.
Being
right. His mother's name was Dark Magistra, for crying out loud.
Right. And then think about the whole duality of brothers or twins or counterparts. Arion has a brother. Apparently, they're the twin sons of Calcula and Dark Magistra. Obsidian is a twin, and Psycho Pirate has a counterpart or an earlier thematic twin in the first Psycho Pirate. And then the last connection I have down is apparently in Psycho Pirate's backstory, he has an abusive father.
Oh, yes.
So does...
Yeah. What was his name, anyways? Somebody Rice. I can't remember his first name.
Well, Obsidian. That's Obsidian's.
Right.
But even Psycho Pirate apparently had an abusive father as well when I was doing his research on him. I don't know if that has come up in any of your reading or anything.
It has not. But, do you know when that was established? Was that maybe part of the JSA Classified story that he was in with Power?
Could very well be. Yeah. But, some of that stuff just kind of a fun game. I'm not saying any of this is exactly... Although, I wouldn't put some of it past Wolfman, because when he was constructing the new Teen Titans, he very much was interested in the 3 females and the 3 males of the New Teen Titans all were along some kind of triangle. And there's four males, but he was playing with 3 of them. But certainly with the girls, you had Wonder Woman in the middle of Raven, who was emotionally very tight and stunted, and then on the flip side of Wonder Girl is Starfire, who was nothing but emotion, and in the middle you had Wonder Girl. So I don't know. Some of it kind of speaks out, and I sort of say, yeah, I can see why they would have chosen these 3 to go. Not only just to move the story along, but there's a loose connection that is kind of fun to speculate about.
And it does seem that this is, of the settings to which the Monitor dispatches his agents there at the beginning, it seems like this is where the Psycho Pirate's most likely to get into trouble. Because, well, that there's a large local population whose emotions he can play with and feed on, and there's a big bad master magician who's going to be there to kick his butt if when he inevitably goes ahead and does that. So it's a good place for the Psycho Pirate to jump off from the main cast and to be get himself into trouble with everybody else and be conscripted, abducted, rescued, recruited, whatever verb you want to use, by the Monitor's great adversary.
He even says it there, right, on the first long panel there.
Mm-hmm.
So many emotions. You feel them, my friends? This is glorious, simply glorious.
It's going into full Renfield mode there. And Arion immediately lays down the ground rule to him that if he uses his emotion-controlling powers on his people, quote, punishment will be swift. And very grudgingly, the Psycho Pirate agrees. But almost immediately, he lags behind the others and just kind of seats himself on a rock outside the city and just sits there drooling over the prospect of all those lovely emotions upon which to feed. And this is where we find him at the top of page 20, where he is thinking to himself about how it's no longer enough to change emotions. He now needs to feed on them. So he's becoming a little more vampiric here.
Oh, he warned Harbinger. He did warn her way back in issue 1.
Mm-hmm.
Once it starts, it doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm. And then, like a predator scenting its prey, there's a sniff sound effect in the middle of his thought bubble. So I guess he thinks about sniffing, and he notices, he becomes aware of fear. He catches a psychic impression of fear behind him. As you can see in that top panel, there's a little pinkish-white energy burst appearing behind him, and that is the first indication of Pariah being forcibly teleported into this time and place. And he demands of He pulls down his hood and asks of Psycho Pirate, "Where am I? I need to know." Psycho Pirate says, "I think it's Atlantis. Don't ask the year." And he doesn't need to, because Pariah has enough on the ball to know that if he's in Atlantis, he must be on Earth 1. Which is peculiar. Are we supposed to assume from that Earth 1 is the only one of the many, many parallel Earths that has its own version of Atlantis?
Right. I mean, Obsidian says the page before, he says, I've heard of it, seen it in movies, but nothing could prepare me for what it really looks like. Right. So I thought the same thing. I said, either that's just their way of firmly cementing, answering once and for all that, yes, Arion is Earth 1, but I think we kind of knew that.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah, so, yeah, I thought that was awfully Earthist of them to...
Yeah. But, yeah, it is a good point, though. If Obsidian of Earth 2 has heard of Atlantis, then there's probably going to be a version of it on more than one Earth.
It also goes to show that Psycho Pirate really isn't paying attention to much either. He says, I think it's Atlantis. Well, Arion just said it on the page before, that you're in Atlantis.
Yeah. Psycho Pirate's too busy, scratching himself and engaging in other withdrawal behavior to really pay attention to what's being said and done around him. All he saw were perceived as soon as they arrived were all those people down there in that golden city and all the emotions that he could muck with.
I missed a couple things about page 19 I wanted to point out real quick before we continue on. You have to kind of marvel that they're back at Atlantis, and Arion is kind of totally okay that there's this giant tuning fork in the middle of the city that seems to be occupying space where part of the city should have been.
Good point.
I would, somebody's house got removed. And he, where does it say something about the gates and that they shall never, the sacred rune of Kala, the gates, they shall never fall. And it's a nice little bit of dialogue. Obviously, we know the story of Atlantis, the fabled story of Atlantis, and Arion does not. But you also, it's kind of a nice little connection when you're thinking about other events, because in Infinite Crisis, the Spectre puts his hand through one of the cities of Atlantis. I forget, I don't know if it is Atlantis itself or if it's the sister city, but he totally picks it up and demolishes it.
Yeah. And something bad happened to Atlantis in Our World's at War, too.
Oh, yeah,
That's what touched off that whole Obsidian Age thing in JLA.
Yeah, it got sent back.
Yeah. Atlantis and Paradise Island are two places you don't want to live in the DC universe, because every time there's an event,
something happens.
Right.
Also on page 19, he meets Lady Cheyenne, who is his love interest in his series, and she would appear in an Arion miniseries in 1992. She would even show up in Jeff Lemire's Superboy run near the end in 2011.
Huh.
So she had a long, more or less supporting role when it came to Arion, which his series was still going on by this point and would end around Crisis issue 6. And then they would put out a special that would be kind of the finale to his larger story. So he may feel like an odd choice to bring in here, but he's the closest thing, I guess, to a Doctor Strange type character. I guess,
Well, there's you got your Dr. Fate, you got your Dr. Occult, and
true.
So on. But there are other occult practitioners that would be like a present day Dr. Fate. But you've got a mystic, and you've got sort of a gateway into another major DC Comics setting or milieu in him.
Yeah.
So it's like two birds with one stone if you use Arion.
Yeah. And again, to your whole thing about, hey, what's going on? She practically asks Arion that, and he says, you know what? I do, but don't ask me anything right now. Kind of like, hey, you're kind of blowing her off there. Maybe you should. Obviously, it's to save us from having to hear the story yet again. But you would think he might say, okay, come over here and let me tell you about it off panel so that we don't bore the readers.
Yeah, but just then, Obsidian has to draw his attention and the readers to the fact that Psycho Pirate has fallen behind the group.
Yeah. Which takes us back to page 20.
Right. So Psycho Pirate is hungry for emotions. Pariah shows up. And just like that, Psycho Pirate decides dinner is served and says, no need to feel sad or worry around me, friend. Not when I need your feelings more than you do. And then the man called Pariah, who can only cry, is rather grotesquely forced to laugh. And he's very alarmed by this. He says, Lord, no, don't make me. You don't know what you're doing. Stop it. As if there were some kind of cosmic consequences to interrupting Pariah's divinely imposed penance of constantly witnessing and mourning the passing of every single universe that dies, which we later learn was foisted upon him by the Monitor himself. But that would be telling. But so he's very alarmed here, and but if there's supposed to be any kind of consequences to making Pariah laugh, we don't really get to see them because Arion shows up and zaps Psycho Pirate, calls him a demented fool, and so there's now open hostility between Arion, Obsidian on one side, and a bunch of Atlanteans as well, and Psycho Pirate on the other.
If you didn't know it by now, Psycho Pirate calls Pariah purple hair.
So it's not just a shade of gray you're seeing, folks. That it is actually kind of a purple or a lavender color.
Yeah. This page really speaks to the heavy Dick Giordano inking over Perez, especially on the laughing faces there in the middle of the sequence. Those cheek brush strokes on Pariah, very sort of heavy ones on the second panel, and the way the laugh lines stick out on this third and fourth panel on Psycho Pirate and on Pariah are a little less refined than what Perez would do.
Mm-hmm.
Perez tends to be a little bit thicker in his lines, and these are a little bit thinner and brushier. Also down on the last panel, again on the cheekbone, those shading lines on the cheek and the indentation. There were a couple sequences also in the Great Disaster stuff with Commandy. Some of the musculature, the way it's shaded, is less Perez and more Giordano, and it's something that kind of sticks out to my eye just because I'm so used to seeing Perez art done a certain way, a way that I kind of enjoy, and Giordano's inking, kind of steals a little bit of the Perez flavor, just a tiny bit.
But he is the what was he? Editor-in-chief, executive vice president. What was his official title? Here we go. Vice President, Executive Editor. That's what Giordano was. So he's the guy writing the Meanwhile column. So if he wants to ink this major event, you don't tell him no. Yeah. But it was
just some. Go ahead.
I'm not as aware of these things as you are usually, Peter. But even I noticed, especially the seventh panel with when Psycho Pirate models the happy expression for Pariah. So here, lighten up, laugh, and the lines around his mouth. It almost looks like this issue of mine used to belong to a 6-year-old who was scribbling on it with a ballpoint pen. It kind of looks like someone just drew a pentagon around Psycho Pirate's mouth.
Right.
So I kind of see what you mean about the lack of refinement there.
Yeah, I think it actually made me. I had a note at this point where I said, I wonder if Perez was doing these pages almost in chronological order, because as the issue goes on from page 1 to the final issue, it actually feels less. It's almost as if Perez did more of the layout work and more of the finished work in the earlier pages, and by these end pages, maybe because of time or whatever, Dick Giordano had to do a little bit more on his end in terms of inking. So it doesn't stick out as bad. It just is just a little bit, just not as the crisis look as we will get once Ordway jumps on. And certainly nothing like the covers. So if you really want, you want to know what Perez is like inking his own stuff, you can look at the covers. We'll eventually get Ordway. But between Dick Giordano and Ordway, we also go through another inker in issues 3 or 4 with Mike DiCarlo, and then you're really going to see Perez must have been really on a crunch because the artwork it lacks even more refinement.
Well, yes, that might also serve to explain why these couple of issues here between issues 2 and 3, as I said in our last episode, are to me some of the least memorable of the series. So maybe when we get into DiCarlo's inks, maybe that is part of the reason for that.
Maybe. Also, a lot of setup going on, right? Yeah. So we'll get there when we get there, I guess. But just something I always tend to, I'm not the one that should be saying this because I'm such a huge Perez fan, but I always, when people start getting into this whole conversation about, why can't it be like the Crisis where Perez was great and he did everything? And it's like, you know what, Perez was damn great, but the Inkers kind of were not all that great. And really, what I think people are remembering are the Ordway collaboration. When it, by issue 5, when it really does, it has a really nice soft look to it, and maybe the covers, but sometimes we forget, and like I said, it's not bad. It's not bad.
No,
it's
not
still
at
Paris. Yep. He's not shortchanging anything. Just look at the next page, on page 21. I love that top shot up there, with all the different panels and Arion in the middle, and there's all that symmetry between 3 panels on the right and the 3 panels on the left. The first inner panels have a singular face of someone that we know. The middle panels are the denizens of Atlantis, and then the farther outer panels are of Atlantis, starting to be affected by Arion when he's being hit by Psycho Pirate's Fear Blast, So that is Perez. Look at the design of that, So it's not. I'm not saying he's shortchanging. So just a little something I'm keeping note of as I read.
Yeah, it's very nice layout. It's showing us a chaotic sequence of events and imposing a kind of narrative order or sequence on them. That's what comics storytelling is all about. Yeah. And Arion in the middle there. Again, a gripe about the color conversion from issue to collection. The energy aura around the mystic sigil that Arion's generating there, it's red in the original issue, but it's turned into a sort of a pale shade of blue in the trade, and I think the red works a whole lot better.
So wait, is the sigil itself red, or is the Kirby dots around it red?
No, the Kirby dots, the Kirby crackle. That's
okay.
Yeah, the sigil itself is the same pale green in both places, issue and trade, but then the aura around it is red here, which it's a complementary color to green, so it's naturally going to look better. And for some reason, they decided to make it blue in the hardcover.
So on page 20, when Psycho Pirate is getting hit, that magenta overlay, which is the same as the Kirby crackle, what is it in the trade? Is it that same kind of overlay kind of pinkish?
Well, Psycho Pirate is more solid in the collection. The color scheme is about the same. It's skewing a little more blue than green for the energy manifestation. Psycho Pirate himself is still red, but he's more of a solid red. And where you can see the impact lines of the energy through his cape in the issue, you can't see that. The solid red of his cape is opaque to that energy effect in the collection.
Yeah, that's part. I wonder if that's still like part of the holdover of that kind of flexograph or whatever it was. It's sort of same way that in the first issue, whenever anybody was disintegrated by the white cloud, they had that blue outline, and it was almost like a blue overlay as well. It makes me think that they tried it out for these first 2 issues, and then they were like, you know what, this really doesn't work. It's not giving the effect that we thought it would. And it's even down there on the bottom of page 21 with Psycho Pirate disappearing, and on page 21, Orion's hands are also that kind of, I can only really call it like an overlay. It looks like if you, I know when you get original art, you get like a page of original art, and sometimes they would have a sheet over it, like a tracing sheet over it, of like an overlay of something that they needed to be done in a different color, but they needed to separate it in the original art for the printing and the color process. So it almost feels like that. Like he kept all these things empty on the original page and then drew over top on a piece of tracing paper the image of Psycho Pirate, and then you go, oh, there he is, there he's not, there he is, there he's not,
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, Peter, because if you look at that image and compare, again, hardcover versus issue, it does seem that Psycho Pirate's whole body has been shifted over maybe a half an inch to the left in the trade. So
there you go.
It supports the overlay theory very much there. If you look at the issue, it kind of looks like those Kirby crackle dots are around Psycho Pirate's crotch. So that might be the reason why they decided to scooch him a little bit over to the left, so that it's more around his midriff than his codpiece region down there.
All right, well, let's get... Okay, where are we at in the story? We went off on a little tangent there.
Yeah, people like to hear this sort of thing, though. We'd gotten as far as Arion up there at the top of page 20, summoning Deidre's Chain, which is one of his typical arsenal of protective spells. But it's not quite enough to shield him from the... So Psycho Pirate has just feasted on the fear and alarm and of Pariah. And so he's a little stronger than he was a few minutes ago, strong enough even to, eventually he'll be strong enough to control the emotions of 3 different parallel Earths, as we'll see in a future issue. But here, he's increased his power just enough that his fear whammy gets through even Arion's defenses. It affects all of the Atlanteans, it affects him, but then in comes Obsidian. He absorbs Arion, and apparently Arion's not suffering from the that effect that you mentioned earlier, Peter. How when Obsidian engulfs somebody, he can force them to relive certain negative experiences of theirs. That's not happening to Arion here. All Obsidian's doing is becoming a living field of darkness to keep Arion from seeing Psycho Pirate's face, and thus protecting him from the effect of Psycho Pirate's powers.
Yeah, I had a note here. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've read. Well, I lie. It hasn't been that long since I've read Infinity Inc. But I'm doing a reread of it, and I've kind of stalled at past issue 8. But I don't remember if we've seen that before this way. Of seeing the inside. This is almost akin to Cloak over at the Marvel Universe.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I don't remember his power being used that way, but I can't imagine that they would go too far with his powers because of how well researched a lot of these characters are. So,
yes, and Roy Thomas was giving them just sheafs of notes about Earth 2 stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, the Psycho Pirate senses that he's been partially thwarted, so he just turns to the mob of Atlanteans standing by, about to attack him, and goes, "Yeah, I'll get you anyway, Pee-wee." And he says, "The Infinitor can't protect all of you." So he's familiar enough with, since they are both from the same Earth, after all, he's familiar enough with Obsidian to know that he's a member of Infinity Inc., and he can call him Infinitor. So he says, "The Infinitor can't protect all of you. You're still prey to my madness. And then that shaft of light from above appears, and again, as you were describing earlier, Peter, another overlay effect. As Psycho Pirate's caught in the middle of this, he's clearly not expecting it. He's not happy about it. He's being abducted kind of against his will. He doesn't know where he's going. He disappears, and it leaves Obsidian and the Atlanteans to stand around. And Obsidian observes. He makes the same observation I just did. He disappeared, but I don't think he planned to. And Arion is, Lady Chian is fawning over him off to one side, and he says, "Thank you, Lady Chian, but my strength returns quickly. To where did the Psycho Pirate vanish?" Peerless, impeccable grammar from the Archmage of Atlantis. So we cut scenes there, so the Atlanteans and Obsidian don't find out where Psycho Pirate has gone. But we, the readers, do. We go to a place of total blackness. All we can see so here's these great Parisian, thin, horizontal...
claustrophobic.
Yeah, very, very. Yeah, these this horizontal stack of panels. Psycho Pirate's just sprawled out on the floor of this panel, and he's saying, "What happened? Where am I?" And then he has a little dialogue, and the foe of the Monitor now speaks to him. He doesn't even have word balloons as such. His dialogue just kind of appears, bounded by quotation marks. It's as though it's emerging directly from the blackness surrounding Psycho Pirate. It's just like the words are forming right out of the darkness and the shadow, and apparently this is to a visual way of telling us that the voice is like ice, because the psychopirate then tells us so in so many words. Your voice, it's like ice. And psychopirate, clearly very badly unnerved by all of this, nonetheless tries to put up a brave front and immediately threatens this eerie presence that's taken him away from Atlantis, and threatens to show it, quote, teach you the meaning of terror. He demands that his new captor show his face, and a little bit of ironic punishment happening here, Harlan Ellison style. The Anti-Monitor says, "Fool, you would want a face without one of your own. You want to scream, don't you? Well, fool, you cannot, not without a mouth." He has no mouth, and he must scream. And so here we see the Anti-Monitor, not only we know that he has the ability to destroy universes, but I think this is the only time we see him warping flesh, exhibiting the ability to enact physical changes on living beings like that. And so this is how the Anti-Monitor then brings the Psycho-Pirate to heel, is this vertical sequence of panels, and threatens him to threatens the Psycho-Pirate with removing the outlet for his emotions. If he can't express his emotions and thereby feed upon and manipulate the emotions of others, he'll die. And so the Psycho-Pirate is immediately cowed by this and becomes the little, Renfield-like toady that he will be to the Anti-Monitor for the rest of the story.
It's a great, horrific sequence. And I guess this is the first time we meet him, yes? More or less, the Anti-Monitor?
It's the first time that we're present, so to speak. Well, it's the first time we witnessed the Anti-Monitor talking to anyone in person.
Right.
Remember, there was that scene with the Guardians of the Universe where the Anti-Monitor spoke through the main power battery. But yeah, this is the first face-to-face, so to speak, no pun intended, that we get with the Anti-Monitor, where he's actually speaking in the same space where the action of the panel is taking place.
Yeah. And at this point in the story, if you didn't read ahead, I guess maybe some of this could feel like, well, the Monitor brought some people together, his champions together, to help save the multiverse, and is this the Anti-Monitor bringing his own group of quote-unquote champions to fight on his side? Now, obviously as you read on, we see that is only partially true,
right.
But there's something to say about, all right, if the one side of the coin is doing that, why wouldn't the other side do that as well in this story about positive and negative and matter and antimatter and Monitor and Anti-Monitor, even though he's not called that just yet.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, makes good sense to me. So there we go. He's the Anti-Monitor has headhunted a member of his opposite numbers team. And the Monitor knows it, because right after this dialogue between Anti-Monitor and Psycho-Pirate concludes, right after, we get one more little slat panel there at the bottom, the long shot of the Monitor satellite and a word balloon, the Monitor saying to Harbinger, "We've lost the Psycho-Pirate." And then down at the bottom, Harbinger continues the dialogue. Monitor, surely his powers weren't that crucial. And the Monitor replies, and this is an interesting remark that he makes here, "My dear Lila, I needed him more than either Obsidian or Arion. The menace we deal with is one of emotion." And we don't get that much explicit expansion on what the Monitor means when he says this in the course of the story, because to the naked eye it would appear that the menace we deal with is one of giant freaking waves of antimatter wiping out entire universes. But no, the Monitor's perspective on this is that it's as much a matter of emotion as it is of physical destruction. All right, and at this point I'm going to jump back to my thesis and see what I can do to shed a little bit of light on this. Okay.
Page number?
Thank you, Peter. I was going to shout out to James Richardson and everyone else out there reading along at home in your own copies of the thesis. It's on page 68. I may have read part of this earlier when the Psycho Pirate made his first appearance in issue 1, but it has to do with the Psycho Pirate. The Psycho Pirate is a personification of the emotional cost of wars and disasters, an aspect that had been little considered in superhero comics prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths, which combines elements of both war and disaster. And now, some years after having written this, I realize that that's kind of a debatable statement, that the emotional cost of disasters had been little considered in superhero comics prior to this. But most of the time when a big disaster happened, superheroes were able to rectify everything and set everything right again in the course of a single issue. And next issue, we go on to the new threat. But so I realize that there's some objectionability to what I wrote there, but moving on to the next sentence. The text repeatedly goes out of its way to portray the emotional responses of the everyday residents of the DC universe and to show the hero characters in unfamiliar attitudes of grief, fear, doubt, despair, and desperate hope, all emotions that the heroes rarely experienced within the generic security of the old oniric climate. Emotion is one of the main themes of Crisis on Infinite Earths. The devastation in the story is framed as a state of mind as much as a physical occurrence. In the words of the Monitor, the menace we deal with is one of emotion. And the series itself was conceived in anticipation of the emotions of DC fans, serving as an expressive catharsis and a meaningful transition for them. And the character of the Psycho Pirate is crucial to the expression of that theme. So there are a few thoughts I had on it's almost a little metatextual glimpse of the Monitor's opining that the problem is as much about emotion as anything else.
What more do we like but metatextual opining about anything? I mean, and on the other side of Blackest Night, yes. The Anti-Monitor, the war with an Anti-Monitor would be emotional. He got sucked into the fear core, and then got absorbed into the Black Lantern, And I know that's not what the Monitor is saying here, but it was something that kind of poked in my head a little bit.
All right, and now a little note from the Titan's Tower coming up here in this panel also, as Harbinger immediately suggests and even calls up an image of her suggested replacement for Psycho Pirate on a monitor there in the upper right-hand corner of the same panel. Then what of the empath called Raven? And the Monitor says, I can find no trace of her. If she is on this Earth, everything about her has been changed. So, Tower Dweller, Peter, shed some light on that. What was Raven's status quo as of this series?
Yeah. Well, first of all, these two panels here at the bottom are like the only holdover to all of the pre-Crisis issue number 1 appearances of the Monitor and Lila. Although she's appearing as Harbinger here. Mm-hmm. I mean, even down to the point where Lila's asking him questions and he's talking about research and
and telling Lila / Harbinger that her suggestions are worthless.
Yeah. Blowing off everything that she says because the Monitor knows, right? I thought these two panels it was a nice kind of like going home. Oh, look, that's almost like how all the writers tried to write them if they only knew what they really were like,
Yep. Even the fact that there are two panels shoehorned in at the bottom of a page. It's like a lot of the Monitor's cameos were in other DC titles.
Yeah. So Raven at this point, so this is Crisis number 2. By this time in publishing continuity or publishing history, the second volume of New Teen Titans, which was put on Baxter paper, and was only sold through the direct market. It actually was only sold at comic stores. You couldn't get it at mom and pop stores. That was one of the big things about the Baxter line. It was only at specialty shops. So that second volume was up to issue 8, and the first 5 issues of that volume dealt with the terror of Trigon and finally defeating him once more, and Raven disappeared at the end. So yes, by issue 5 she was definitely gone, and and that took place before Crisis number 1. And then you have to imagine that, the Crisis takes place a couple months later than all the other titles that it is released against.
Right.
So it's even at that point, they hadn't found Raven yet. So she is not in the New Teen Titans thing at this point. Wolfman obviously would know that because he was writing both series, and I guess it's just his way of maybe answering readers' questions or trying to anticipate, well, why not use Raven? Well, that's because, if you're a fan of this stuff, you probably already know that she is nowhere to be found. And so much that not even the Monitor knows where she is, because probably Wolfman didn't even know at that point. So better to just, at least bring it up in case someone had the question. And again, speaking to that whole, if you're dealing with the DCU universe, and you're talking about emotion people, then you would, I think they even mentioned, or the Anti-Monitor mentions in a later issue, hey, Psycho Pirate, I don't really need you. I can go get Phobia, which is another New Teen Titans, Marv Wolfman Perez creation. A fun way to interconnect these characters and almost even to give them a trading card-esque status, power level. Hey, Psycho Pirate, Raven, maybe they exist on the same power level, but...
yeah, it's the squash table dimension of continuity, just theoretical pairings of characters. It's something one of my thesis sources talked about, Harold Schechter in his book... I've forgotten what it's called. Never mind. But yeah, and looking at that little image of Raven up there, looking very much like she's posing for a trading card on that monitor, I definitely see what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. There's a lot of comics that did this, but especially when Rob Liefeld's X-Force hit, and the enemy Strife, the villain known as Strife, he had his strike files. Strife's strike file was like a whole other comic.
Oh yes, those were the days.
Oh, I love those. The Avengers did it, when they started to bring in a lot of those stats in from trading cards into actual comics, and this sort of has that feel to it. In a way that's a little more story driven.
That Harold Schechter book was called The New Gods, Psyche and Symbol in Popular Art. Got that out of my bibliography on page 151. And it was published at Bowling Green.
Well, there you go.
I think that book is actually, I found it in the Penn State Library when I was an undergrad, and I think that's how I learned about the Department of Popular Culture at Penn State, at Bowling Green, and that's how I ended up going there for my master's.
It's all connected.
Yep. That's the Crisisologist Creed. All right, and then panel 2 of this Monitor and Harbinger little skit cameo thing here. The Monitor looks right out at the reader, and here's another panel that doesn't... I think we can see Giordano's influence here, too, Peter. It doesn't look quite as Parisian as some of the other panels. He's just looking right out at the reader and saying, "No, I fear we will have to forego this avenue and investigate another. Get me the... Lila, my dear," just a subtle little condescension there. "Get me the file on the new Dr. Light. It is time for me to create her." So, bit of foreshadowing going on there. And also, I can't help but think of... you remember that one... I think it might have been in one of the Firestorm issues when the Monitor had one of his cameos. The writer snuck in that little panel, a caption saying "Monitor created by Marv Wolfman of Mamaroneck, New Jersey," or wherever he was from, as a callback to how he Wolfman used to write the old Dial H for Heroes series in Adventure Comics, and he would take submissions from readers. As far as new characters for the H-dialers to turn into. For some reason, I thought of that when the Monitor looked out to us and said that it's time for him to create the new Dr. Light, like he's going to dial her up or something.
You know what it made me think of?
What did it make you think of, Peter?
It has absolutely does not have the same weight, but if you want to talk about different moments throughout the 12 issues of Crisis that kind of exist in my brain outside of it, very singular moments. Certainly the death panel of Supergirl, or I don't know, just very iconic imagery. This line has kind of always been one of those things. It is time for me to. It's not quite. I did it 35 minutes ago, but it is. It has a little bit of that resonance for me. It is time for me to create her. Because you got to think about, if you're a reader of DC Comics, you know who Dr. Light is, and they're going to create a new Dr. Light. Well, why? He's not gone from the DC universe, and not only are they going to create a new Dr. Light, he's going to create her.
Right.
Speaking to Wolfman's idea about diversity and changing things up. So
I think that's the first time that's ever really dawned on me, Peter. I mean, because I've read this for the first time long after Kimi Hoshi had been a part of the DC universe for a long time, and so I never really thought about that from the point of view of someone who'd been reading comics in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s and understood Dr. Light to be a male villain.
Right. I mean, that's like one of those things that I guess maybe that's why it resonates, where I was sort of like, what? You're going to create her? Ooh. You also have to, I also enjoy the the different ways that, how many plans does the Monitor have? I think this is the third plan he's going into now, because I think, when he said he lost Earth 3, like that meant he had to change things up, and
five characters he needed are gone, so he has to recruit differently.
Yeah, now Psycho Pirate's gone, and now he even says we have to forego this avenue and investigate another. We have to go a whole different route. Let me get the new Dr. Light, and then also getting Alexander Luthor Jr. Like getting these new bits and pieces are also affecting in a subtle way, because it's not something that Wolfman really played. We don't really learn anybody's plan until the friggin', I don't know, 12th issue or whenever it is, or 10th issue or whatever, or this, no, I guess it is the last issue, and maybe some other ones. So it's interesting to see that he's also very fluid in the way that, and maybe that was Wolfman's plan, because he was like, hey, I never know in the middle of this when an editor's going to come to me and say, oh, you can't use that person because of such and such. So taking people off the playing field might mean a subtle shift. So we never really get a plan, just like you said about the tuning forks. We never really get an understanding. We're not shown on page that the heroes know what to do with these tuning forks. They just know they have to protect it. I mean, even though Dawnstar says, how do we turn it on or whatever, but so that's two panels. They're just two small panels, but I love them. I love those two little panels there because of that. And then how awesome is it to see the sun rising in the background when he says, "I have to create the new Dr. Light." Little foreshadowing going on there.
Yeah, to be sure. All right, and then, well, without fanfare, we just jump directly back to Atlantis, 45,000 years ago, as the Atlanteans and Obsidian, the remaining agents of the Monitor in that period, continue. Well, so we jump right back to them after one page away, and they're confronting Pariah, and Arion is explaining to everyone that the Mad One, meaning Psycho Pirate, was about to inflict some kind of bad harm, possibly kill Pariah, when Arion himself intervened. And Obsidian, none of them know who Pariah is yet, obviously, so Obsidian says he's not from Atlantis then? He's kind of dressed to be in Atlantis. As you observed earlier, Peter, capes are kind of the fashion down there right now, so that's why, Obsidian, Psycho Pirate, and Arion were a good choice of dispatchees to that particular place and time. But Pariah then explains, no, not from this Earth, but another. something that we hadn't known about him up to this point. As far as we knew, he was some kind of alien. But no, he's from an Earth, and not just any Earth, but, Pariah goes on to say, the first that fell when this insanity began. But long after I was cursed for an evil act I had committed, a deed I have paid for 1,000 times over and must suffer still 1,000 times more. I witnessed tragedy, and my being here means disaster is soon to strike. So there is some crucial backstory about Pariah, which will be fleshed out at a later time. But we, the readers, didn't know much about that up to now. We knew that wherever he was from, Legends of Superman and Batman, we knew that he wasn't from the same Earth. He wasn't from Earth 1. We knew that much because of the scene on Earth 14 when the world's finest get together on the Daily Planet building, and then Pariah pops up for a couple of panels to beg for help and warn them of what's coming, and then is sucked away again. Apparently, Atlantis is where he was sucked away too, unless he dropped off someplace else to watch another Earth die in between. But here he is, and he's revealing to us that he is actually a parallel Earthling, just like all these other people he's talking to, and he's also guilty of some kind of original sin, which is his current state or fate of being forced to witness the deaths of these universes over and over again is a sort of penance as a result of that. So.
Did you mention when he showed up in present-day Earth 1?
Well, yeah. When
okay.
They're talking to Superman and Batman, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I missed that.
Yep, that's I did mention that.
Now, when he says, so he says, I'm from the first Earth that fell, but long after I was cursed for an evil act I had committed. And he's talking about the curse of going to all these different Earths. But I don't remember, even though I read number 7, not too long ago. So I guess, if I remember, so his world was destroyed by the antimatter, and maybe he was just floating around for a little bit before he gets the not the power, but the curse of going to different Earths.
As I recall, it was more than a little bit. It was a very... Oh, here we go. I just flipped to page 189 of the hardcover, which is somewhere in Crisis number 7. It's one of my favorite sequences in the whole Crisis story. It's the prolonged origin story of of everything, and it says that he was floating alone for millions of years, all alone. So that's why he's saying, "Long after I was cursed for an evil act I had committed." So his universe died.
Okay, good. I was a little unsure of that.
Yeah, his antimatter observation chamber saved him from the fate of his universe. But that happened, and then sometime long afterwards, the Anti-Monitor came along and realized that he could somehow take advantage of Pariah's experiment and take this. He was aware that a part of his antimatter realm had flowed into one of the positive matter universes, liquidated it, and absorbed it into the antimatter universe. And the Anti-Monitor thought, hey, if this happened once, maybe I can replicate this and do it over and over again until there's no universes left but his own. So, so the Anti-Monitor didn't trigger the crisis, but it's... Ultimately, the original sin, to coin a phrase, lies with Pariah. But then the Anti-Monitor picked up on what Pariah had accidentally done and found a way to weaponize it, and so the rest is history.
Right. I do like when he says, a deed I have paid for 1,000 times over. Earlier on in the issue, Monitor says, 1,000 Earths have died. There's a kind of, the comparison there, I know I'm a little hard on this whole specificity thing. Right. I want to know exactly how many infinite Earths there are.
Right. So there's a little bit of poetic hyperbole going on Wolfman's part, coming through the mouths of Monitor and Pariah, and there's a good character-based excuse for that. It seems like 1,000 times to Pariah, from his point of view, from the point of view of the sufferer.
Right. Even to say 1,000 times more, where we know that, there's not quite that many or more Earths left. Well, I guess maybe by this point we don't know, but we will soon enough.
Yep. Earths are getting a little thin on the ground.
Yeah. Well, what would we expect? Purple prose from a guy who has purple hair, so.
It's all connected.
That's right.
All right, all of which is kind of burying the lead because as Pariah is describing his suffering and where he's come from, he segues to, he says that his fate is to witness tragedy and his being here means that disaster is soon to strike. And Arion picks up on that immediately and worries about what this means for his beloved Atlantis. And he's concerned because the Monitor promised that this giant tuning fork thing, which as you pointed out earlier, Peter, is taking up some valuable real estate in the middle of Arion City, is supposed to prevent tragedy from striking. They're supposed to activate the machine, and that's going to fend off whatever disaster is supposed to come. And then Pariah simply responds, and I tell you what I am. I move between your time periods, but everywhere I go, I see the same sign. And as if on cue, a big white blotch appears in the blue sky above. Or if you're reading the hardcover trade, it's sort of a pinkish sky. So, I think I understand why they did that. The sky is blue in the hardcover collection on the first couple of panels. It's blue on the top panel. It's blue on the panel, the third panel where Arion is pointing at Pariah. But then the bottom few panels, the sky is starting to turn pinkish. So there's your... It remains blue on every panel in the original issue on page 23. Uh-huh. But in the hardcover, they recolored it... pink to suggest that the red sky effect is beginning, and I think that was actually a pretty smart move on the trade packaging team. So score 1 for them on that. Not every decision they've made was a good one, I think, but that one definitely was. So there we are. The sky turns reddish. The antimatter field begins to appear, and Pariah proclaims that in a matter of hours, this Earth will die. And Obsidian looks skyward and exclaims, "Then the Monitor lied! He lied!" Which isn't exactly true, but again, Wolfman is playing games with us. He wants us to maybe not trust the Monitor completely. This is the whole fact that the shadow demons are still shaped like the Monitor's silhouette is perhaps meant to engender a bit of distrust in us. Yeah.
It's not going to be quite a couple of hours. It's going to be 2 more issues. So that's a lot of time. But yeah, I mean, I do like this. Activate. That's what it is. It's Arion who says we have to activate his machines. And so how? We don't certainly know that. And are they really there to protect? Are the machines there really to defend against any of this? No, nobody really knows. Yeah. I mean, that's ultimately not the reason why they are created. Well, created to protect, but not against the wall of the anti-mind. It's a whole other different reason that they're going to be used for. And is Arion the first person to say Christ, even though he says crises? See, I have a note here that says I think he's the first person to ever use that terminology.
The first appearance of some form of the word crisis in Crisis.
Yeah,
huh.
Yeah.
Well, I have not been keeping track of that, so you may be right, Peter.
Yeah, I know. Again, I'm keying into a lot of the Crisis wording, and I know in later issues, it does definitely get. In fact, it gets so cemented, it gets beat over your head. But as of now, I'm sort of just watching and seeing who's saying what. And in terms of the Arion supporting cast. That blonde girl that we saw on the last panel on page 21, and we kind of see her there up in the middle on top of page 23. That's Mara, M-A-R-A, from the original Arion series. And when I looked it up, they said she was a tough kid. They even gave her a dialect that was very reminiscent of like the Brooklyn or Bronx dialect. And eventually they would weed that out of her dialogue because it made no sense why she would talk like that back at that time. And I've always wondered, I don't know, but is the Asian-looking or the Hispanic-looking kid who reaches up, Arion, my collar, look. I don't know if that's a supporting cast member, but he's, or maybe it's just a random denizen, but I've always wanted to figure that out.
Yeah, he looks like he ought to be somebody.
Yeah, right. That's sort of what I get, yeah.
Yeah, he appears in several crowd scenes. Back on page 19, when Lady Qian runs to Arion's arms, that same guy is standing right there behind her.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I sold off my Arion issues long time ago.
Yep, and I've never owned more than 2 issues, so I'm no help
They're,
there either.
yeah, it's decent. I don't know if you have a hankering to read, 45,000 stories that are set 45,000 years ago, but especially like the Jan Duursema stuff is not too bad, and it's I see it all the time in back issue bins. So if it is something that you ever want to read, it's probably not that hard to find some of the issues. But
Well, I'll be at Wild Pig a couple of days after we record this, so
will I.
You will?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I'm a-coming.
All right.
I got my checklist of certain things I need.
Yep. I've got all of my checklists, and one from Pants, and probably one from Shane, so...
Oh, boy.
Happy hunting for all of us.
Now, the last thing on this page made me wonder, what language are they speaking? And how do they talk to each other? Because I think in issue 1, Arion wasn't he given the typical comic book language of the brackets around his wording so that you know that he's speaking another language, I think, when he's talking to Harbinger on the ice bridge. Now, I mean, there's so many in-story things that you can say. Clearly when they were on the satellite, he was even... No, I think he was... No, was he speaking another language on the satellite? I think he was.
Well, I'm looking at the page. I'm looking in my hardcover here. The page when Harbinger arrives to recruit him. She's just been possessed by the black influence of the Anti-Monitor. She's a little rough with Arion. In fact, knocks him off the ice bridge. But yeah, there are no brackets around his dialogue. There's no sign that the two of them are not able to understand each other. So, yeah, I'm guessing we're left to assume that the Monitor has made some kind of super scientific arrangements that allow everyone from different eras and different Earths to understand each other.
Okay. But this is it. This is the first sign of the antimatter matter cloud coming to Earth 1, right?
Yep.
I think that's, and that's, I mean, you mentioned in the previous episode about Superman saying, I had to stop a volcano that erupted in the middle of the Mediterranean. No big deal. That happens. But we know, no, Soups, that doesn't happen. And now here's the second, first what did Monitor say? First the nature goes wild, then the red skies, and then the white cloud of nothingness. So it is happening.
Look to the signs.
All right, page 24. Are we ready to go on?
Sure thing.
Okay.
All right, so Harbinger remarks aloud to the Monitor back aboard the satellite as we see, indeed, that aforementioned white wall approaching Earth 1. And she says to the Monitor, the fraying begins again. That's an example of a crisis term that doesn't really stick through to the end of the series. You don't hear much mention of the fraying after the first couple of issues, but that's originally what Wolfman came up with to describe the antimatter consumption effect, as the wall of antimatter slowly consumes and negates the contents of a positive matter universe. That's called the fraying.
I do like it, though, because what's a way to sort of describe the makings of a universe, right? They usually say the fabric of the universe, right? Don't they usually? Isn't that kind of like a common phrase?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You can also be said to weave a story or weave a tale. So. Yeah.
So the fabric of the universe. So fraying, fabric. It kind of I noticed that word too. I made it stuck out to me as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was used somewhere in issue 1 too. Couldn't tell you exactly where. But then the Monitor has got himself hooked up to a crazy Cerebro helmet kind of rig, and he says, "Oh, darn, and I haven't completed the arrangements for the new Dr. Light." Yes, he's beginning to succumb to, it's because, as we've been told, he's tied to all positive matter. He draws his strength from the many thrumming worlds of the positive matter multiverse, and as there are fewer and fewer universes in that multiverse, he gets weaker and weaker, and his opponent gets proportionately stronger. And Monitor is all but giving up here. He knows that he's going to die one way or another soon, unless some desperate new strategy has just occurred to him while he's sitting there with this helmet on his head, trying to tweak whatever cosmic knobs need to be tweaked in order to create his new agent, Dr. Light. But then, meanwhile, that classic comic book transition, we go to another series of long and claustrophobic horizontal panels. And this time it's Harbinger instead of Psycho Pirate having an audience with the Anti-Monitor. And Harbinger is apparently... She's either split off a part of herself to go talk to the Anti-Monitor, or she's just ducked out while Monitor was in mid-sentence. So she's talking to her boss, and she says, "The Monitor has implemented his plans, though not all his warriors are in place, most stand ready." As if warning the Anti-Monitor that there is some opposition to his plans. And then we get our first, even so half glimpse of what this great foe of the Monitors look like. He's standing there, he's just kind of silhouette. He almost looks like he's wearing a high-collared trench coat as he's looking out this big viewing window.
It's Darkseid.
Were some people... Did some people hypothesize that he might be?
Absolutely.
I thought you said that in the last episode, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so standing there looking at this very kind of George Lucas-style observation window, kind of like what the Imperial officers were using aboard the Death Star in one of the later scenes of the movie. But he's standing there, he's watching the fraying approach Earth-1, and he speaks... once again, his dialogue is just silhouetted against solid black. His word balloons, in the second panel of this exchange, he's actually using balloons with tails, minus the quote marks, and they are black. And this is a lettering and coloring design choice that would not persist through the whole story. Eventually, his word balloons would come to look a little more normal, just black lettering on white background instead of the negative reverse. So he's saying that the Monitor will fail, as he has always failed, to stop me. So that tells us that there's been a long history between these characters. I steal his strength and mine grows stronger. His champions are doomed as I pit one against the other. Which is first succeeding in doing that with Psycho Pirate. Now go, there is work to be done. And at that point, Harbinger, just sort of blankly standing there and listening to the orders she's being given, and a little sparkle burst in the second last panel on the page, and she's gone. And then some text blocks. As always, he proves the incompetent fool for not accepting the inevitable. When I am done, all his universes shall be destroyed, while mine shall rule supreme. So there's a little more clarification as to just what the Anti-Monitor has in mind here. He's slowly and methodically, one by one, wiping out all these positive matter universes until only his own is left. And I don't think we've been hit over the head with the possibility that he's operating from the antimatter universe of Quard just yet. But
no.
Longtime DC readers know that this is a guy who's got a universe, a singular universe all to himself, and he wields antimatter as a weapon. So I'm guessing some people reading this at that time probably would have assumed that Quard was involved somehow.
Yeah, I mean, he does say, and you could go so many different ways with this, right? Because he says, when I'm done, all his universes shall be destroyed, while mine shall rule supreme. That doesn't necessarily mean just singular. It could also mean plural, right? Like,
true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I mean, it was a complete guessing game for me because I was not as familiar with Quard and the antimatter universe. It may have been mentioned in some of the Green Lantern books, but you got to remember at the time Green Lantern was on Earth at this point. So there were some backup tales, but I started reading Green Lantern about 3 or 4 issues before he came to Earth. So, I wasn't up on my Green Lantern mythos to this degree to sort of even think about the antimatter universe, It hadn't been in play for a while. So, and I guess to go back to the whole Darkseid thing, we kind of did this with Commandy. Before this issue, Darkseid really had only appeared in Legion of Superheroes Annual number 3, which was a story titled The Curse, which was itself a sequel to the Great Darkness Saga, which is one of the high points of the Legion of Superheroes, which was a story that was in, 1982, 1983, or somewhere around there, maybe even 1981. He was also featured in the X-Men New Teen Titans crossover in 1982, and the Hunger Dogs graphic novel in 84. But again, outside of like that Legion stuff, prior to that, it was all he was mostly featured in stories written by Cherry Conway, who sort of kind of like took over the new gods from Kirby, in Adventure Comics and Secret Society of Supervillains and JLA and that one JLA JSA crossover. So speaking of the whole, Darkseid thing, I guess it wasn't that far of a mark for people to go, well, maybe this is his introduction into the DC universe. Now, I'm certainly glad that he was not, in hindsight, certainly not the villain, and they would save him for the next event, Legends, which, like we said, firmly planted the new gods into the new restructured DC universe. Yeah, we sort of take it for granted that the new gods are firmly entrenched in the DC universe, but at this point, they were, more on the fringe more than anything else.
Right.
Yeah. So, outside of Darkseid, do any of them get any play in this series outside of Darkseid and Desaad? I mean, I don't even think Light Ray. Does the Light Ray and Orion show up in any of this? I don't think so. So,
I think they must, because I think I remember seeing at least Light Ray on this big Perez and Alex Ross painted cover.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they go to issue I think it's in issue 12. He shows up with all the other ones as they head back to the antimatter universe. But anyway, yeah. So the mystery of who this person was a real thing back at this point. We were really trying to figure out who the hell is this guy.
And that it was a completely new character. This was one of the theories advanced, I hope.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, nobody had any idea what was going on, and Wolfman wasn't helping, so.
Only further note I have about this page is, the way the anti-monitor talks about his opposite number, who, as we've pointed out at length, we didn't really, readers didn't know was an opposite number exactly. But the Monitor's foe says of the Monitor, as always, he proves the incompetent fool for not accepting the inevitable. So this bad guy here, this big bad, he's pretty ruthlessly progressive. This guy, you have to accept change and just get with the program and move ever forward onto oblivion. You can almost kind of hear like a kind of corporate ethic in his dialogue here. It's the inevitable. You're going to die. Just deal with it. This is going to be the way things are. It's progress, and so I can hear that sort of corporate ethos in his words. And later on, I do have some things in my thesis about how I kind of interpret the Anti-Monitor as a character. And one of my thoughts is that he is kind of a personification of certain corporate interests and mandates that DC was attempting to serve by putting all these changes to their continuity into practice. So they've personified these for the benefit of the fans and readers as a villain in this story.
And you know what? I know some people might say, well, that's reading a little bit too much in it. Morrison does that more than Wolfman does. But
yeah,
I would not discount Wolfman, because he is a very smart, and he was not only was he dealing with other editors and Dick Giordano and Jeanette Kahn, but when we get to my fun facts later on, he was also dealing with the marketing end of things. They brought in representatives from marketing and business to talk about this, because it was such a huge event that it was going to change not only the DC Comics, the printed DC Comics, but DC Comics as a business. So I would not put it past him to, maybe he was. A lot of that was, look, not only can I talk about this larger story in a sense of DC Comics, but I can talk about comics themselves and the business of comics. So I like that theory.
All right, and the Anti-Monitor continues his rant from page 24 onto the final page of this issue, number 25. A couple more black-colored dialogue captions. Universe after universe has fallen before my power. World after world is absorbed into one. How many worlds do I now control? He asks rhetorically. How many lives are now mine? And then abruptly he leaves off, and the bad father stops talking, and then the good father begins his spiel. All of this happening. We're shown this. All of this happening in. Are over and around this huge image of Harbinger's head. This is the battleground of this exchange right now. It's a battle for Harbinger's soul, as if her allegiance is what will swing the tide of this multiversal conflict. So we've already got the influence of the Anti-Monitor in there, and then the Monitor gets to say his piece in these blue-colored captions, where he once again reiterates the fact that he is the one who raised little Lila. It's the cameos appearing in 1984 kind of suggested that theirs was just kind of a secretary and executive kind of relationship, but apparently she's more than an administrative assistant. She's a daughter to the Monitor, as we're told over and over again. The Monitor just is speaking to her, knowing full well that he's not really speaking to her. He's speaking within his own mind, as if he were speaking to her. I don't think she can really hear what he's saying, because it's important to the Monitor's plans at this point that the Harbinger not know that the Monitor is aware of what she's planning to do, what the Anti-Monitor is going to make her do. The Monitor needs to make his Christ-like sacrifice. So he's thinking to himself, he instilled hope in Harbinger, and now he's inwardly pleading with her to, quote, find that hope, Lila. Call on it soon, for the darkest times are only hours away. Resist his temptations, Lila. Lead yourself not into temptation, but deliver the multiverse from evil, I guess. Through you, through the child from Earth 3, through the man who calls himself Pariah, only through all of you and my champions, and all of my champions, can the universes that still live survive. So there we go, driving home again also that these newly created characters, these characters that were created for this purpose, this ad hoc bunch of characters that Wolfman put together just to drive the plot of this series. Pariah, Harbinger, Alex Luthor. These are going to be of central importance, foremost importance. And as I read that passage from my thesis in an earlier episode, the fact that they assume some of the heavy lifting as far as advancing the plot and bringing the DC universe through, or multiverse, through this transition from multiverse to universe, kind of helps to keep the story from getting too hung up on any one established DC character, and allows it to function more as a story about the DC universe as a system rather than a story of any given single character or group. So Wolfman is bearing me out here by having the Monitor stress in his internal monologue of his that Harbinger, Pariah, and Alex Luthor are the keys to everything.
The tug of war aspect of this last page is really great. I mean, it's great artistically. Perez has divided the page up into 6 vertical panels, and splitting Harbinger right down the middle. As you mentioned, she's torn between the two.
Good symbolism.
Yeah, and also in the dialogue, it's reflected. If you go back to the previous page, the Anti-Monitor constantly refers to her as Harbinger. Harbinger, speak to me now. And then how does the Monitor refers to her? He refers to her as Lila. It's a much more personal address, and I kind of like that. I kind of like that the difference there is really listed, not only visually, but it's also in the dialogue as well. It's a nice little counter. In fact, Monitor says Lila a few times. He says it 1, 2, 3 times on the page, constantly maybe trying to reinforce that side of her, as you mentioned.
Right, because that's the side most likely to listen to him, for one thing. For another, as you point out, Anti-Monitor keeps calling her Harbinger because all that matters to him is her power as Harbinger, her power to destroy, to slay her mentor and adoptive father, And it's only in that role that she has any value at all to the Anti-Monitor. But the Monitor loves her for the person that she is, underneath all the power that he's instilled in her.
There you go.
Yep. Made it to the finish line, folks. Issue 2 in the books.
You mentioned stuff from the text page in the previous episode, I believe.
Yeah, I did. That's where we got last episode's Crisis fun fact, that this whole Crisis thing was largely conceived and fleshed out between Wolfman and Ween during a visit to a convention in Philadelphia. So, go Philly.
It's all our fault. The birthplace of America and the birthplace of the Crisis.
And it's like W.C. Fields used to say. Well, reputedly, his last words were, "Frankly, I'd rather be in Philadelphia." He was on his deathbed, and someone asked him how he was feeling, and that's what he said, supposedly. So, the entire DC multiverse joined you, Mr. Fields.
Well, now that this issue's done, what do we, any other sort of over thoughts about the issue? Does it work? It's a lot of setup still.
Yeah.
We get some new locations within the DC universe. We get a few more clues about what's going on. Certainly reading it at the time, it's not like I knew where anything was going. So it's not even that I could sort of second guess, Oh, well, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. Well, you know what? No, I have no idea what's going to happen. Just got to let it, almost like we were just, we're just there for the ride.
Yeah. We went into some detail about general overview comments in our last episode. So
that's true.
Not going to add too much to it. I'm just going to repeat what I said. This is not my favorite chapter in the Crisis story. It's one of my least favorites, but even that said, it's still damn good.
All right. What do you want to do? You want to go... We're almost done. We want to do some feedback from last issue. We figured we'd get the meat of the episode first.
Yep, and see how much time we had left. And, we're a long way from 3 hours, so...
Good.
For us, that's actually ahead of schedule. So, okay, yeah, you want to do some feedback from the CGS forums?
Yeah, this is feedback on issue 2, part 1. We're trying to collect anybody's story about being a Crisis kid and Alpine maps. Do you have the forum up?
I do.
Do you see his post where it says, "Time to share my Crisis kid story"?
I see it. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, do you want to read that one? You're going to sound better than I am. So,
okay.
I thought, like I said, it's kind of fun to hear where people first experience the Crisis.
Indubitably. All right, so Alpine Maps writes, time to share my Crisis Kid story, as I am a Crisis Kid, having just gotten into comics in 1984. I got a huge bundle of comics at a garage sale in late 1984 with a ton of DC comics mixed in there, including a bunch of Kirby Jimmy Olsen, but alas, it was missing the Darkseid first appearance. Those of you who didn't know, Darkseid really did first appear in an issue of Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, which was one of Kirby's Fourth World titles. Among those comics were the 5-part Crisis on Earth Prime story in All-Star Squadron and JLA. To 12-year-old me, I had no problem understanding the difference between the Earths, and I remember thinking to myself that it wasn't confusing at all. I vaguely remember picking up Crisis as it came out in 1985. I remember reading the end of it, though, and being blown away. Being the OCD comic book fan that we all are, I had to get everything Crisis-related. So once ICG published the official Crisis on Infinite Earths Index, and also the official Crisis Crossover Index, it was done. I had to have it all. So between 1986 and 1988, I managed to grab everything, and considering how recently everything had been published, it was easy to find. About 5 years ago, I sold off the entire collection, which included my copies of GI Combat number 274 and 275. Every time, I know, they are tough. Every time you guys mention it, my heart breaks just a little, as I would have gladly contributed those to you guys if I still had a collection to speak of. Small price to pay to give something back to you guys. I'm loving listening to you guys spend as much as you are on each of these issues. It's a big deal to this 42-year-old man. Well, thank you very much for that, Alpine Maps. We appreciate the thought, and you can rest a little easier because just recently, just within this past month, I have come into possession of actual paper copies of GI Combat number 274 and 275.
Nice.
Yeah, they came from. One of them was found by Pants at a comic show at that convention center out at Oaks. You know the place?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They had the Great Philadelphia Comic Con, I think is what they called it, and he found it in like a dollar bin someplace. So that was number
Son of a
275, and then 274 just arrived in the mail like this week. Eamon, our friend Eamon Clark, Caliban on the forums, he found it at a show in Manchester, I think he said, and he just sent it across the pond to us. And it's a funny thing. Apparently, these issues are easier to come by between what Eamon finding his and James Richardson finding his at the London convention. Apparently, there are more copies of these to be found in the UK than there are here. It's weird. But anyway, thank you very much for the thought, Alpine Maps. Thank you for sharing your origin story with us. And, well, now we just have to get copies of those for you, Peter, I guess.
Yeah. Whoever JamFeb is on the forum, he also found...
Yeah, that's James Richardson. That's...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
He found it at London Super Comic Con.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So one of the things that Alpine Map says about... he had to get everything crisis-related at the time. You brought this topic up when you were talking about the Warlord issues on one of the Monitoring the Monitor episodes about, was it a collector's game? Did DC put these Monitor appearances into certain titles so that people could be introduced to those titles, even as they were ending? And I don't quite remember it being that way for me because I was collecting almost every title that he did appear in. I dropped off on Warlord. I probably dropped off. No, I did get all of Jonah Hex up until the end, from a certain issue up until his last issue. So I probably did have that appearance, but, I sold those issues off years ago. I don't know. I don't know if it was quite the collector's scavenger hunt like they are these days when, nowadays everybody comes out with checklists prior to the event so you can get everything. But it does speak to there is something to be said about the scarcity of a lot of those issues. When you were going over the Batman issues and there are also some detective issues that have some crisis-related things. I don't see them ever. In fact, it's always interesting to go through like a run of Batman books in a back issue bin, and whenever it gets to the issue number of the crisis-related tie-in, there's always a hole, it'll go, I don't know what numbers it is, but like say it's like 575, 576, no, 577 because that's the crisis issue. I've come across that a lot, and I feel that way obviously about GI Combat, but there's also other ones too where I'm like, oh, I want to go get that crisis issue. I see a whole run of blah, blah, blah. And then you go through it and you're like, there's every issue before it and every issue after it, but not the issue I need. So
I hate when that happens.
Yeah, so, DC's print run wasn't very huge back then. It's probably more than they are now with some titles. But, it's an interesting game to try to collect those random they're not even main Crisis crossovers, and they're not Crisis issues themselves, and they're very hard to find.
Yeah, there's no a special Crisis crossover banner on the tops of them. I know that. I hear what you're saying about those detective issues. I think they were the last Crisis crossovers that I was able to scare up. Well, actually, you know what? I lie. They're the second last. I had a harder time finding Swamp Thing because those are Alan Moore written issues.
Yeah, and those tend to be a little more expensive too.
Yeah, but yeah, for one thing, you're lucky if you can find any pre-Crisis issues of Batman or Detective in back issue bins to begin with. Because I do find that late Bronze Age Batman it's pretty highly sought after by collectors, and usually when I go into a cheap bin, the run of Batman they have will begin with issue number 401, which is after Crisis, and it was a Legends crossover. But so yeah, any issues of Batman before that, Crisis crossover or no, are a little rare. But it's interesting to note what you're saying here about. Those Crisis tie-in little Red Sky issues being even harder to find than the average.
Mm-hmm. DM Hate has a lot of good stuff, and his one paragraph, he starts to go in into a little bit of what you went into last episode about issue 2 itself and the structure of the storytelling. Starts there at he says issue 2, on the other hand, has a lot more seemingly randomness or chaos to it. You see where that is? It's like
Still
in the middle
there,
of the
in the
paragraph.
middle of the paragraph, right. Issue 2, on the other hand, has a lot more seeming randomness or chaos to it, as we see some initial crisis impacts on the past, Anthro, future, Legion, and present, Flash, Batman, and Joker, before we return to the cliffhanger from last issue, 10 pages into number 2 already, and are given at least some hints or direction on what the 15 gathered are being asked to take part in. Not getting the full story at this point, along with the constant scene shifting, really, in my opinion, adds to the reader's feel of how out of control or chaotic this multiversal crisis really is. Indeed. Yeah. And thanks also to DM Hate for jumping in. Our friend Al, Alien Al, Alan Bow, on the forums, expressed some confusion and disbelief as to the distinction that is drawn by some people, as we mentioned in the last episode, between Golden Age Superman, the character that actually appeared in 30s and 40s issues of Action Comics and Superman, and the Earth 2 Superman, which is like a late 60s, like late Silver or Bronze Age construct that's meant to be kind of an extension of the Golden Age Superman, helping to explain how that character, as well as Batman and Wonder Woman, could have been around in the Golden Age as a member of the JSA, and is still around on Earth 1 as a member of the JLA today. So thanks to DM Hate for pitching in there to help to hopefully explain to Al kind of a difficult subject. So what it amounts to, Al, is that some people are just such hardline Golden Age conservative traditionalists that they don't accept that the Earth 2 Superman is really the same thing as the Golden Age Superman. It certainly, as far as DC is concerned, and always has been concerned, the Earth 2 Superman character is supposed to be what became of that character that appeared in Action and Superman back in the 30s and 40s. It's like an adult, contemporary version of that character. It's an outgrowth or an appendage to the Golden Age adventures of that character. But some people just think that no, the only true Golden Age Superman is the one that actually appeared in those early stories, and this invention of the late 60s and 70s was just there to, he's at best a stand-in for the Golden Age Superman. And DC just took all of his Golden Age adventures and grafted them onto this new character, built to take part in this vast retcon addition to DC's continuity that was Earth 2. The entire Earth 2 reality, that whole parallel Earth, was a retcon device to help explain how how the current, then in the Silver Age, current generation or crop of superheroes could be reconciled with the DC Comics characters of the Golden Age. So the answer is that if you're wondering how the Earth 2 Superman could possibly be different from the Golden Age Superman, the answer is they aren't necessarily different. It's just that certain readers, fans, historians tend to regard them as different characters. But in universe, as far as DC is concerned, they are one and the same.
And if you think about it, there aren't many stories that exist with the Earth 2 Superman at that age prior to All-Star Squadron.
True. And he showed up a couple of times in JLA, and he played a part in the revived All-Star Comics in the 70s.
Right, and he's usually played as sort of being, post-World War II, right? And so it's...
Yeah. Then there was the whole backup series of Mr. and Mrs. Superman, too. Remember that? It was in Superman Family. I think E. Nelson Bridwell wrote most or all of it.
When does that take place on Earth 2?
I think it's supposed to be present day.
Okay.
Or was it? Or was it? All right. Now, I haven't read as much of it as I would like. So it might be set during, like the 50s.
Yeah,
The more I think about it, the more I think that maybe, it wasn't set during the present day with Superman and the Grey Temples. Because I'm sure Infinity Inc. didn't play. Well, Infinity Inc. hadn't been created yet. This is still the 70s we're talking about.
Right. When did he get the Great Temples? Did he show up in JLA and JSA like that? Yeah, I think a couple of those crossovers he had the Great Temples, right?
Yeah, well, they needed to do something to distinguish him visually from the Earth 1 Superman.
Right. So really, when you get to All-Star Squadron, that's sort of like the main title that if you really want to see the Earth 2 Superman act, look like, and even have kind of the similar powers to the Golden Age Superman of DC's publishing history, that's kind of the closest you're ever going to get. So he was a little more brusque. He was a little more, manly man.
Yep.
Rough and tumble.
Yep, just jump in, 2 fists cocked, and more of a man of action and a little less establishmentarian.
Yeah, which is smart on Roy Thomas's part. If you're going to harken back to his Golden Age, those Golden Age stories, so it definitely does make sense. Agitprop asks about, did we notice recently in Infinite Crisis Fight for the Multiverse, which is a tie-in to the video game of the same name. A lot of those series have some multiverse angles, especially because Nix Uautan appears in it as well. And the Monitors also, I think I mentioned before, also appear in Smallville continuity, and Smallville Season 11 comic book.
Huh.
They're all over. They are all over the DC universe right now.
I don't know if I'm happy about that or not, honestly. But there they are. Oh, and Agitprop goes on to encourage the two of us to do something about multiversity eventually.
Eventually.
Yeah, we will stress eventually there. And we say the same thing to those of you, I think it's our friend Chuck, Jack Sir up above, who also says he'd like to hear us talk about New Frontier and Kingdom Come, and a couple of other people echo that sentiment on the thread. And all we can say is appreciate the suggestion, but one thing at a time, folks. Got a lot of irons in the fire here. We got a lot of other stuff to talk about. We will have something for you about Convergence before too much longer, but just, all in good time. There's plenty of plenty more CTS episodes to come. We'll get to one series at a time.
Yeah, and that Convergence talk will be on the CGS proper, not on Crisis Tapes.
Right. We've got an episode planned to be recorded sometime in the next couple of weeks about the first wave of Convergence number ones.
Lastly, Mod Polybius.
Sounds good.
Okay. He wants to know if anybody knows of any plans of a multi-part Crisis movie, perhaps an animated movie, much like Dark Knight Returns. He feels it's probably too long or too complex or too difficult to translate into another medium, to which I agree. However, outside of the JLA Crisis on Two Earths animated movie, which is probably the closest thing you'll get to a Crisis-related concept, there is always been speculation that the reason why their DC and Warner Brothers are keeping the TV universe different from the movie universe is because they could very well play around with the Crisis angle, the multiverse angle, or maybe it's just in honor of, I don't think they're as this well thought out, but I'm certain someone like Jeff Johns probably could make an argument within the business world and say, look, DC is known for this, so go right ahead and create as many Flashes as you want, and sometime when we have the budget, we'll put them all together.
Totally. Yeah, that's one thing one traditionally DC cool thing that DC can do, playing around with the adaptation of their characters from medium to medium, that Marvel... I won't say they can't do, but they wouldn't be able to do it as convincingly as DC could. So yeah, that's one thing, one way where they can get an edge on Marvel as far as adapting, their content to large and small screens. Create their own little multimedia multiverse. Yeah.
Multiverse 3.
I think that might be up to 4, actually.
Okay, there you go.
Or 3.5. What the hell? It's fractions exist. And I don't know about any plans to adapt this into a movie either, but Peter already mentioned the JLA Crisis on Two Earths. Give that a look if you haven't, because it's worth the price of admission just to hear James Woods play Owlman. And there's also an audiobook adaptation out there of Crisis, so you won't get to see any of the fancy Hollywood special effects, but at least it's a dramatization. It's something to scratch that itch for you if you like.
Yeah, it's from Graphic Audio.
And
do you have a Crisis fun fact?
Well, no, but in lieu of that, I'm going to allow Eric Nolan Wethington to contribute some Crisis fun facts for us.
Okay.
Pursuant to a question, I think it might have been from DM Haight again, raising the issue of John Byrne's involvement in Crisis, and whether he might possibly have been approached at some early time to be the artist. So Eric Nolan Wethington, who is higher up person at Tomorrow's Publishing, and knows a lot of cool inside baseball stuff about comic books and the people who create them. And he's also one of our longest and most loyal listeners. And he contributed this to the talkback thread of our last episode. Regarding John Byrne's possible involvement in Crisis, here's what George Perez told me when I asked him if he was involved at all in the initial plotting. And quoth Mr. Perez, I think the initial ideas were worked out by Marv, Len Wein, and Bob Greenberger. I don't know if, when they were conceptualizing it, I was even attached to it. I'd heard John Byrne might have been approached because Marv didn't think I'd be available for whatever reason. So when I found out about the project and said I'd definitely be interested in doing it, I believe John had bowed out anyway, they didn't bother looking any further because I was the logical choice. And this is Eric talking again. Now, George was a little fuzzy on the facts, and it may be that rumors and memories are intermingling, and it never happened, but George makes it sound like Byrne was approached to be the artist initially. Of course, by that time, John was writing his own stuff, i.e. Fantastic Four over at Marvel, and wanting to keep going in that direction, and I don't know if he would have taken on the job if he was only going to be drawing it and not at least be involved in the plotting. Whatever the case, while it's possible he was approached to be the artist, or even artist/co-writer, I think it's safe to assume the basic ideas for Crisis were invented by Marv, Len, and Bob Greenberger. So thank you for that insight, Eric.
Yeah. That's a good point that Perez says, in Byrne's head, maybe he thought he was being asked to both write and draw, but really, Giordano was like, we just want you to draw it maybe, and maybe, you can add some stories to it stuff. And in Byrne's warped mind, he was like, well, no, I must write it, obviously. I'm sorry, I'm just so against that whole thing. So, but
I don't blame you a bit.
What's that?
I don't blame you a bit
yeah.
for being against that whole thing.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's a nice little thing to. It's just so rare. It's so funny that there's, okay, so can I go to my fun fact?
Absolutely.
I was cleaning up my room, little spring cleaning, and I have a plastic crate of stuff that's comic related that I've received over the many years of CGS and other stuff, like buying ash cans at Mocha and collecting bookmarks and trading cards and, books about comics, and it's just too much. So anyway, I found an old Comics Buyer's Guide, issue 1300, dated October 16th, 1998, the mega issue exploring the Crisis. And it has a cover by Fred Hembeck. The Comics Buyer's Guide, for those people who don't know, a newspaper-esque newspaper magazine, weekly, long-running, no longer running right now, but at least not in this form, I don't think, and edited by the Thompsons, right? Maggie Thompson, and I think that's her name. Peter David used to have an article in here.
But I Digress, I think it was called?
Yep. Yeah, Maggie Thompson was the editor. And the cover is an homage to Crisis number 7, where Superman is holding Supergirl. And this one is Kronos, but the 90s Kronos, or 2000s Kronos.
Walker Gabriel.
Walker Gabriel, thank you. Holding Barry Allen Flash. and he's saying Iris, and it's drawn by Fred Hembeck, and it's hilarious. So it's an issue. I pulled this out and I said, oh my God, there's got to be some little fun stuff in here to throw in a Crisis fun fact, which I told Adam I did a re-listen to all of the episodes of the Crisis tapes and realized that the fun facts were actually a fun part of the episodes, and I was dropping the ball, and I said we have to do them every episode, and Adam has been great about doing that. So
doing what I can.
Yep. So this one is a little less. It's not so much trivia, but a little bit more about some of the larger ideas of why they wanted to create the Crisis. And we've mentioned a few times, the whole thing about Marv Wolfman wanting to restart the DC universe prior to issue 12. And as a way to sort of create like a dividing line and just have every issue start at number 1, and just like they did in the Silver Age, where they created a new Flash, Barry Allen, and a new Atom, and he wanted the same thing to happen. The readers would still read about Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, etc., but maybe they're not exactly the same secret identities, and it would be a way to diversify their line and update it for a new reading audience. So that's been well documented, I think, right?
I think so.
Okay. Well, the other little fun fact, again, not so much a trivia thing, but maybe you can sort of speculate or come up with this. Not only was that a strong impetus behind doing this, but there was another reason why Marv Wolfman wanted to create all these new number 1s, and it has to do with the year of 1986. What else was going on in 1986?
Well, the thing that immediately leaps to mind is Watchmen.
Outside of the DC universe.
Oh,
outside of DC Comics. Sorry.
Is it outside of comics altogether, or just outside of DC?
Just outside of DC. Who was there? And it has to do with their competition.
Okay. Well, Jim Shooter was still in charge over at Marvel.
What was going on for Marvel in 1986? Is that important to their history?
Well, it's not Secret Wars. Is that when the new universe was introduced?
You're getting there. 1986 was the 25th anniversary of the modern Marvel Universe.
Oh, okay.
Right? 1961 being Fantastic Four number 1,
right,
correct? Right.
Exactly, yeah.
So here's an article from Comics Buyer's Guide with a quote from Marv Wolfman. He says, the second part of the Crisis relaunch mission was aimed directly across town at DC's marvelous competition. This isn't a quote. I'm sorry. This is the article. 1986 happened to be Marvel's 25th anniversary, and a flood of number 1s, Wolfman figured, would take the wind out of Marvel's anniversary-induced sales. He says, now this is a direct quote from Marvel, as it turned out, Marvel didn't really do anything big for its 25th anniversary, so that really didn't matter.
Yeah, that's why I didn't think of the anniversary when you were asking me what goes on in 1986.
The problem that happened with the relaunch plan was that about halfway through the series, the Crisis series, there was an editorial meeting, and the editors argued that if the heroes forgot the Crisis, it would invalidate the entire story. And then he would go on to say, obviously, it's not about the characters remembering the Crisis. The readers would, and that's all that really mattered, and you could get away with it, and they certainly have done that since then, and now, sort of absorbed all that into the language of the DC history of saying, yes, we did have all these shakeups. The characters maybe don't remember it, but you know what? We remember it as readers, and we keep bringing it back. There was a Crisis. There was 0 Hour. It's happening right now in Justice League issue 40, like we talked about at the top of the episode. Mm-hmm. But the angle of, again, to talk about the marketing angle, because that's something you have to think about in these larger stories, he was very much of the mind of what they did post Flashpoint and saying, you know what, let's flood the market with number 1s and take the sales away from Marvel. So I thought that was an interesting little paragraph when I read that. So that's my fun fact for this episode.
Yeah, Wolfman was a forward thinker. A marketing idea that was nearly 30 years ahead of its time.
Yeah. So, great. Cool.
All right. Ready to just bring this one back to the barn?
I think so. Yeah, we're obviously next issue we'll take a look at issue 3. Next episode, who knows how long it'll take us to do? Seeming to work out 2 per issue. But
yeah, it's falling into that pattern. I think it's working pretty well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do that. Probably divide it into 2 episodes to cover issue 3, and probably do the same thing with issue 4. And we'll see where we what course we chart for ourselves after that.
Right. I know Adam gets a little bit busy now in May, so we won't promise when we'll come back. But we did pretty good. We did 1 in January, 1 in February. We took off for March. We did 1 in April. We did 1 in May. I assume this will be released.
Yeah, within
in May,
the first week of May. I'm pretty sure that's when it's going to go.
So if we don't do another one until June or July, don't hate us. But
well, how many months went by when there were no episodes of the Crisis Tapes at all? So I think we're still within acceptable rate of productivity here.
Yeah. And hopefully now that the summer's rolled around, I might even be able to get to the studio for the next one. So that'll be good.
All right. Well, we can't say for sure exactly how long it'll be until we next make contact with you to talk about issue number 3. But until then, thank you very much for devoting so many hours of your free time to listening to us natter on about this series that we love so much. If you would, please keep on visiting thecomicforums.com to offer your comments on our thoughts and observations here, share your own theories and thoughts. And if you have any Crisis Kid stories, please keep those coming in as well. We love to hear your comments. And as you know, we frequently just read them here on the air and use them as springboards for further discussion. We want this to be a dialogue as much as possible with our fellow crisisologists as we can. And I guess we'll just talk to you next time the planets come into alignment.
See ya.